welcome to, I guess this is the, it's like the 106th UDAAP meeting. Appreciate you all attending. We have two items this morning, the first of which will be the City Springs Elementary Middle School. This is the first time we're seeing it at UDAAP, though it has been part of the master planning for the PSO area in the past, which the panel is very familiar with. So with that, I'll hand it off to Pavlina to introduce the panel.
Good morning, everyone. 160 UDAAP, but who's counting? Welcome. We're excited to have you this morning and review together this really important project. Many of us have been along for the ride of the last few years in the process of planning and now seeing the entire development in this neighborhood take shape. The school is one of the most important puzzle pieces to that, and we're delighted to see that it's underway and planning is going on for this as well. So as a matter of introduction, my name is Pavlina Ilieva. I'm chairing this review panel, and with me today also are Kevin Storm, architect and planner, as well as Osborne Anthony, architect and planner. Our panelist, landscape architect, couldn't be here today, but she did review the draft that you submitted and offered some comments. So I'll be able to share those at the end of the presentation. As a matter of just flow today, I'll hand over the reins to you in just a minute. And for the more formal part of the presentation, please try to keep that efficient for about 20 minutes just to go through the prepared slides. This will give us more time to actually dive a little bit deeper. We'll do a Q&A right after so that we can go to a specific slide and spend a little bit more time on it if needed, or ask questions, clarifying questions. And then in the last part, we'll be able to share some comments and thoughts on the project. Without any further ado, I'll hand it over to the project team. Please introduce yourselves and take it away. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right.
Hi, my name is Chester. Go ahead, Fred. I'm sorry.
Yep,
Go ahead.
Fred Mason. I'm Director of Design with Baltimore City Public Schools, and pleased to pass it over to Smolin Emmer Elkovich to present this exciting replacement of City Springs Elementary Middle School on the former Lombard Middle School site to be a large part of the Perkins Somerset Old Town redevelopment. And with that, over to SEI. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Hi, my name is Chester Fernando. I'm an architect at Smolin Emmer Elkovich. With me, I do have Dave Fisher. He is the vice president of our firm, as well as Ron Elkovich, who is our president of our firm. With me, I do have the Clark Azar's team. I have Kurt Rubenacker, who is the project manager for Clark Azar. I believe Jason Azar is here as well, who is the president for Clark Azar. And Brian Jacobson, who is our landscape architect for the team. Did I miss anyone else? Sorry, I can't see my other screen as I'm in a full screen mode right now. Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead straight to the agenda. We're going to be reviewing the scope, site context, existing site plans, some site precedents, the floor plans, and the massing for the building. Scope and background of this project. The new city schools will be a net zero energy school, and it will be replacing the existing Baltimore Academy, which is across the existing school right now. It's currently a vacant lot that's going to be torn down by MSA to be demolished and then handed over to BCPS in April next year. Once the demolition is complete, the new school would be roughly around 126,000 square feet, which is roughly 50% bigger than the old school. For program spaces, like I said, the existing school is currently 80,000 square feet, with a state-rated capacity of 511 students. Current enrollment is pretty low, but prior to the just after the demolition of the PSO redevelopment, which was prior to that, they were over capacity, roughly 123% over capacity. With the new school, they will have a new state-rated capacity of 848 students. The school is mostly going to be a 3-round school with 3 grades per pod, with the exception of the middle school grades will only have a 2 pod per class. I'm currently in the timeline of our building. We are early in design. We're just starting DD, and we are moving fast. We only have a 10-month schedule and planning on project construction start roughly beginning of summer next year, and project completion summer of 2028. Existing context here. The building is situated just east of the inner harbor here, few minutes away from downtown, and right around the neighborhood we have plenty of community partners. As you can notice here, within a 1-mile radius, and with that partnership, the school became a very important piece of this community as part of the Perkins community here in Baltimore. Our major project stakeholders are the Baltimore City Public Schools, Baltimore Curriculum Project, which is a charter school, City Baltimore Mayor and City Council, and HABC Housing Authority of Baltimore City. Looking at the current enrollment right now and where the students are coming from, for the most part, the students at the moment are coming from the north part of the catchment area here, which is highlighted in pink. But we expect that to change as people move back to that new Perkins neighborhood. Mostly coming from the south, that's going to be the anticipated density, north and south of Caroline here. As you are well aware, the city schools is part of that PSO redevelopment plan. It's going to be north of the Perkins neighborhood, just a few blocks from the South Central Park, and adjacent to the 4-story multi-family housing along H and G there, south of Pratt Street. Looking at the site right now, this is our current site plan, existing site plan. Existing building is, like I mentioned, east of the existing City Springs Middle School. That's going to be elementary middle school. That's going to be demolished, and we're going to move in to this new site after the demolition of the old school. As you notice, we have City Springs Park just north of our site, and along the south of our site, we have Bond Street that connects us to the new neighborhood, to that new proposed South Central Park. East Pratt and Lombard are both one-way street. Lombard going westbound, East Pratt going one-way eastbound. South Caroline Street is the expected main road that's touching our street here, our project here. And we also have South Bethel Street, which is an alleyway right behind our site. Current site challenges that we do have. Right now, we are working with city schools and MSA in developing a plan of attack on how the site will be developed right after the demolition of the school. But with that, what we do know, the parameters of the site is that the north eastern part of the site is going to be the highest point of the site, which is around 41 feet above sea level. On southwest of the site, which is 24 feet above sea level. It slopes roughly around 17 feet from diagonally northeast to southwest here. Going from east to west, it's roughly a 12-foot grade elevation change. And we also have a 40 feet right of way right in the middle of the site here that kind of bisects our site, which used to be the old Bond Street. Currently, this is our view of the existing building. As you go around the site, you notice that slope on view A here. There's a split level conditions happening right now at the school. On the southwest corner, we have a 3-story building. Once you go up to view C, which is on the northwest. It's a two-story building. So there's a split level going on right now, which is what we're planning on doing with the new school as well, following the topography. Going to the back of the site, you notice it here, more of that grade elevation change going towards the back of the site, towards Bethel, and how that grade elevation slightly goes up. If you notice, the sill stays consistent, but the grade constantly moves up to the back there. Looking at the existing neighborhood, the current south of Pratt, we do have a 4-story multifamily housing. North of our site, we do have that existing City Springs Park. And south of, looking south at Bond Street here, we have that 4-story multifamily housing as well, with a range of different massing and architecture that we play off with. So looking at the site partition consideration, what we first looked at on the site is looking at what's the current edges that's created by the existing building that's currently there. So we highlighted those, and by highlighting those, we developed a urban edge that's we're reacting to use with what we identified as the urban edge of our building. And with that, we also noticed that there's a potential connection that we can do with the new South Central Park, connecting the green spaces using our site with the existing City Springs Park here as well. So we want to make sure that's a part, and that's also highlighted by that 40-foot right of way. So it's an opportunity to have a connection there without building anything on that path. We also want to make sure that we're being respectful of the architecture around us and this the neighborhood around us, with the civic building being on the north side, with the neighborhood being on the south side here. We want to make sure that our architecture reacts well to that as well. So design process. These are the few early iterations that we do have. We had for the building. We explored multiple approaches here. Iteration 1 is an I-shaped approach with a large community plaza in the front. To really capture that area, but one thing that was not desired is having that too large of a community plaza in the front of the building creates a situation where people can congregate and gather, which BCPS would like to avoid. So with that approach too, we try to minimize that corner. One thing I do want to point out, the service is currently on the north west corner of the building here, which is still tucked away from any view line sight from the street here, but still pretty close to the front of the building here.
Chester, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Are you able to use your cursor and point to things?
Yes. Are you able to see my cursor?
Yes, that would be very helpful. Now that we're into drawings, it will be good to be able to follow more closely, especially because there's so many things on the page.
Yes.
Just to back, it was easier earlier because of just the nature of the material. If you can just backtrack very quickly, I'm assuming that that blue triangle is the service entry that you're talking about. Is that it? Is that correct?
Correct. The blue triangle is the service entrance.
And then the front area along Caroline is that. Yes. Okay. Just
Correct.
use your cursor to the extent possible, just to orient us a little bit into the drawings. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Yes. So I just want to clarify that. Like you said, that the front area here is the pink area zone. I kind of highlighted the building. Pretty much the party of the building. I'm just going to move on to the next slide here. The party pretty much stayed the same for every single one of these. Having the public wing on the north end here and the private wing on the south end. Public wing houses mostly the gym, the cafeteria, the auditorium, and the kitchen, while the private area houses the instructional wing of the building. So we want to make sure that we are addressing the comments from Baltimore City to minimize that front entry. With iteration 2, like I said, it's still quite large for that main entry, and cranking the building diagonal here creates a redundant corridor. So with the next approach on iteration C, we were able to minimize the amount of hallway, make the building a little bit more efficient while eliminating, moving the building towards the front here, closer to Caroline to hug that street face here. And minimizing that community plaza in the front. With this iteration, we were able to relocate the service towards the back here by Lombard and tuck it behind the community space on the north end here. And one small change that happened here was we discovered that right-of-way limitation and the building slightly encroached that on iteration C. So with that applied, the design parameter applied on iterations 4 here, we were able to shift the building closer to the make the instructional wing a little bit shorter, while keeping maintaining most of these programs in the same spot here. We were able to locate some of the programs in the knuckle here in the middle. With that, we were able to capture some of the outdoor learning, which you're going to see now in the newer design. The service area stayed relatively the same in this iteration, where we relocated the community space closer to the front here, so they share a main entrance with the actual school and the after school hours as well. So we have one dedicated main entrance here, while we do have secondary entrance still on the location, but having that controlled entry point close to the admin was one of the BCPS's desires. So here, and here are the quick diagrams on how that circulation worked for each of those design. We were able to maximize and simplify that on the last iteration here, with having the path towards the center of the site, center of the building and the site here, and bisecting the private and public spaces with the semi-private spaces right in the middle, having that bridge between the two, with that two main circulation corridors. So our party diagram here, as I mentioned before, the north end of the building is reacting to the civic scale, which is on the civic church right on the north side of the building, while the private smaller rooms are located on the south, which reacts well to the neighborhood scale on the south here. Each of these, we identified the prominent corners as you approach the site. Coming from Pratt, that southwest corner is a prominent approach, while on that north end, we do have the prominent from Lombard Street going westbound, and north-south, we do have that two corners there next to the cafeteria, and as another prominent corner to be identified. And one part of the party that I mentioned earlier was that connection to both the urban green spaces that's on the site, which is the City Springs Park, connecting back to the new South Central Park in the Perkins redevelopment plan. With that, it allows us to separate the building, having the playfield on one side closer to the alleyway here, protected away from the main streets, while the play area is tucked, kind of nestled between the building here, while easily supervised, is still protected away from traffic. This is the site circulation diagram. As I mentioned earlier, we were able to identify the one-way streets around the site here, and pedestrian traffic, what we anticipate where pedestrians are going to be coming from, north-south. As part of the phase 5 for the redevelopment plan, they are proposing a bike lane that's going north-south here across our site. We are proposing a slight change on that one by adding a vehicular drop-off right in front of the site. With that, we will be discussing that with HABC to make sure that we anticipate this outside of the our public right-of-way, the changes here, the revision that we're planning on making, while still being consistent with the changes that's happening in phase 5 of the PSO redevelopment plan here. We are locating the parking lots on the high side of the building. On the north there, we're providing 40 parking spaces, and having that on the high side of the building, high side of the site allows us to drain that on the north, on the southeast corner there, with all the stormwater retention ponds in the bottom. Zooming into that front plaza there, this is the proposal we're planning on changing by adding that curb cut to for the vehicular drop off. We are going to be shifting that bike lane more closer to our building here, while still providing enough barriers between the bike traffic and the pedestrian traffic, and making sure that there's enough space for vehicular drop off in front of the building. The hardscape and the softscape here, we're highlighting some of the outdoor learning space here, highlighted in yellow. We identified that there's going to be one also on the rooftop here, which is, I mentioned earlier, that outdoor learning space top of the roof here, with additional unprogrammed space on the north here, and some more around the site. The main play field is going to be east of the site, with a 200-meter track, a 60-yard play field with the bleacher, play area right in the knuckle here, right adjacent to an outdoor learning space. Essentially, we call it as an art and music plaza there as well. Going inside the building, looking at it, I mentioned earlier that most of the public zone of the building would be located north of the north side of the building, while the main entry is towards pretty much in the middle, right in the middle of the building here. Main entry with a secure vestibule. Everyone who enters the building will have to check in with the reception, make sure they are verified before they can enter the school grounds here. Just south of the building, we're able to provide a security door just at the intersection of that public zone and the private zone there, an academic zone, to be able to lock off that instructional wing in event of an after-hour use. They can use the northern part of the building while keeping the instructional wing secured and safe. Mentioned earlier that the building, it sits on a slope. So with that, we are reacting with a split level configuration as well for our school. On the east side of the building here, it's going to be the highest part of the instructional wing, while the west side will be slightly lower to be able to catch grade, as well as not to create a huge blank wall right on that southwest corner. So as you progress through the site, you are moving up as well with the grade. We try to minimize the amount of the grade change, and making sure that each of those grade change are strategically placed so that those space can be usable as well for multiple purposes here. These are some of the precedents that we've done before on those transitional space, making sure that those are designed well as you progress through the site. One thing I do want to mention here is that location of the service wing, which is going to be here, it's slightly elevated in comparison to the rest of the main floor here, which is 0-0. That's to be able to catch the grade at 33 feet here on this corner. So this is the tightest we can make it, and we have some internal ramping happening in the corner, but we were able to make that work. Going to the floor plan of the building, just want to talk about blocks here. So to enter the site, like I said, south of the main lobby here is the main admin space with the guidance wing. That's where you check in, and where main office function is going to be. Just north of that lobby is the community spaces for after-hour use. North of the site, we'll house the gymnasium, the cafe, and the auditorium kitchen area as well as some of the auxiliary PE spaces on the northeast corner, allowing us to express that corner architecturally as well, and hide the service area along this northeast corner. Going at the knuckle here, we do have the music and the arts suites here. So the performing arts wing, just at the knuckle, with plenty of access to daylight, as well as close proximity to the auditorium for after school use. With the art wing being close proximity to that, having access to an outdoor learning space for outdoor performances or outdoor artworks. They can use that multiple function for different types of learning here, for the performing arts and the visual arts as well. As you move down to the side, you are greeted with a grand stair that can directly take you upstairs if you're in the higher grades. But most of the younger kids, pre-K to 2, will be located on this floor. We want to make sure we limit the amount of the younger kids going up and down the stairs and having them close proximity to the programs they're actually going to be using, such as the arts wing and the gymnasium and auditorium here. West of that, you'll be greeted with the media center. Locating the media center at this lower point of the building allows us to create a larger volume space for that media center, creating a more grand space. And with that amount of square footage, it's nicer to have a larger a taller ceiling space for those. Each of these classroom will have their own CLA spaces that they can break out to for different types of independent learning or group learning. Moving up to the second floor, as I mentioned earlier, you go up and you're split into kind of the elementary portion of the building, which is 3 to 6. 7 and 8 is going to be the middle school portion, which is slightly separated from the rest of the smaller kids here. With that layout, we're able to locate all the special classroom. All the STEM classroom are right on this knuckle. So science on the second floor, tech, second floor, arts and music on the first floor here. Science and tech will have an access to an outdoor learning space, as well as with the rest of the the grades here in the south. But they have a close proximity with that outdoor learning space for able to use for any outdoor projects that they may have. Similar configuration to the floor below, we do have the CLA spaces adjacent to those grade clusters to be able to provide maximum flexibility for next generation learning. Moving into landscape.
Good morning, everyone. Brian Jacobson, excuse me, with Clark Azar and Associates, and my colleague Jonathan Mallory. Very simply, we had three goals going into the landscape plan. We wanted to, it's school, it's young kids. You can't tell me there's not going to be motion and energy. So we want to create a sense of motion and energy outside to reflect that and to promote outdoor activity, to promote physical motion and energy, to bleed off some of that energy so that perhaps kids are a little more focused when they go back inside the classroom. Our second goal is we want to really engage the senses specifically to provide a variety of things for people to do, to see, to hear, to smell, to feel, not just the kids, but also the instructors and the proctors. And that's, that's shade, that's variety of colors, that's change in the colors. And then also, we know we can't do any of this if we can't fund it. So everything has to be towards the low maintenance end. So we'll use a lot of natives as much as we reasonably can. We'll use material that is acclimatized to the site, not just to Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Maryland, but to this site and to the harsh conditions. Can you go back to the previous slide? I'm sorry. Very quickly, we have two zones. We have the streetscape zone and we have the interior planting zone. The streetscape is pretty utilitarian. We're providing shade. We're reducing the scale of the building, making it a little bit more cozy on the sidewalk. We're capturing and processing stormwater. But more importantly, we're using the streetscape to help blend and weave this project, this school, into the neighborhood, to make it part of the neighborhood that it's going to be. So to that effect, along Lombard Street has willow oaks as a primary tree. We'll be using willow oaks. Caroline Street is lindens. Pratt Street is elms. We'll repeat that as well. Then in the interior space, we have more room to play. We have more room to really pursue that motion and energy concept. So we'll use plant selection and plant placement to draw shapes, to draw lines, to do things, like to really play up color to draw people through the site from Bond Street north to City Springs Park and then back to the south. If you do a lot of walking, it can get very monotonous to walk in a straight line where nothing ever changes. So we have color, shape, texture to draw people back and forth and to help them with wayfinding. We want to use the materials, and we are using the materials to provide an ever-changing tapestry, if you will, outside. The colors, the textures, the smells, the sounds, to really engage the senses and provide opportunities for people to do things, to see the bold fall colors as they change day to day and week to week, to smell the spring flowers. It looked like the school color was purple. We can bring in a lot of purple flowers to really, in the spring, to really blitz school spirit and to give people things to look at and to smell. And if you've seen a child go nuts the first time he or she sees a hummingbird, that's what we want to do. We want to give things for people to react to hear the wind rustling through, the crunchy leaves. So to create that sensory of motion and energy, we're going to encourage physical motion and energy. And then the plant material on the next slides, just a couple of images so you can understand the main site palette. We have some canopy trees to really provide the structure, to provide the shade, to provide some limited screening. You can see we still provide open views under those canopies, so that a child that wanders away from his or her group and ends up on the across the site can turn around and find his or her way back very quickly and can be seen very quickly. Some smaller ornamental trees to provide more color, more seasonal color, variety of low shrubs that are deciduous and evergreen, and ground covers that are deciduous and evergreen. And again, the material on the ground plane we keep low because we don't want, of course, places for people to hide. We don't want visual obstructions. So we keep the trees high and we keep the ground plane stuff a little bit low, and we keep that eye level sort of open for everybody. And then some more materials on the next slide that inspired us, excuse me, in the bioretention areas. Well, we'll have a little bit more room to play and have some fun, if you will. We can use smaller material with more variety of color and texture and make it look like a dry stream bed, that even when there's not a drop of water in it, it looks like it's moving. We can have a little dry stone creek, and the stone will be a fine gravel, not something that, that people will want to pick up and throw at each other, obviously. It could even be sand. But it will always look like there's some kind of motion going on. And then the final slide, the streetscape. Again, the three main trees I mentioned, the willows, oaks, the elms, and the lindens on the three different streets. And then some kind of ground plane, something to cover the tree pits. We're going to be accepting stormwater into those. So we need something that will take inundation and then periodic drought, something that is thick, so that we don't have weeds and we don't have erosion, and something that looks nice. The Sporobolus on the lower right is one of my favorites, but there's a lot of other options, and a mixture of evergreen and deciduous.
Thank you, Brian. So moving into the massing of the building, like I mentioned earlier, we do have a civic context just north of our site here, and we want to make sure that the architecture reacts well to that. The north side of the building houses a lot of our larger volume spaces. So with that, having a larger architecture moves that reacts to the context makes sense. So having this portion of the building have an architecture that matches what's happening across the street really makes sense for us and allows us to really express that one of the prominent corners here on the South Caroline and Lombard Street intersection, making sure that as you approach the site from the north end, you are welcomed with this architecture that greets you and brings you to the main entrance here. So just moving to the front of the building here, you can see the main entrance massing. It's just a slightly different height from the rest of the building here. The simplified roof that we have, want to make sure that we maximize the amount of solar panels that we have on the roofs. That's why we have kind of almost this two elevations of roof here, if you can notice, with the main roof in the structural wing and the second story wing here, with the volume spaces having the same roof allows us to maximize that space. And some of the smaller moves just pretty much have the matching lower roof elevation. So as you turn around that corner, you can see that the main entrance slightly sets back from this, creating a void that really pulls you into the building here. We're playing with play on textures on the materials, and the canopy allows us to really accentuate that main entry feature. coming from both sides of South Caroline Street here. Going around this south of the building, we want to make sure that the architecture reacts to the neighborhood context. We want to make sure that the massing mimics but not copy what's happening across the street here. So having the break of massing kind of marching along the Pratt Street here made sense for us, making sure that the prominent corners are still expressed, but in a smaller scale, not as big as what's happening on the northwest here, allowing that architecture move repeats on this same corner here where the media center and the cafeteria is. But as you turn around the corner, you have this architecture that kind of reacts to the context on the south of Pratt here. We want to make sure that the building edge is respected, and we're not creating too many jogs within this the south of the facade here. Coming from that South Caroline going northbound, you can see that how we express that main entry feature really stands out between the larger volume spaces around it, having that contrast of low and high roof, and having that intermediate roof scape with a different texture of the building, of the main entrance, really brings out that main entrance and catches your eye. Going to the back of the building here, I want to make sure that we express that the pathway that we created to connect the urban green spaces, like what Jacob said. Like Brian said, he mentioned that the softscape is not just a straight line; it's a soft landscape. Want to make sure that it's a good contrast between the built environment, which is very rigid here, and having the landscape to be a soft, meandering path allows us to create that really soft spring-like motion that's cutting through our site here as well. You can see an approach from that corner from East Pratt as you approach our building. You can see how that massing turns around the corner and brings you into the back of the site here. And here are some of the presents we've done in the past before, with using the landscape to really soften the green space around the site. I want to make sure we point out that underneath this display field, we do have the geothermal well field. This is a perfect spot to capture a lot of that wells to bring into the building. As well as I mentioned earlier, simplifying the massing of the building really allows us to maximize the solar panel array on the roof here. And locating the instructional wing on the south really brings in a lot of daylight on that portion of the building. Really allows each of the classrooms to have access to daylighting as well. Going towards the back here, you can see that the the play areas are nestled in the building. Really create that not too dense of environment, but open enough that people can supervise it, allowing access to daylight as well, and while keeping it safe and away from the rest of the vehicular traffic here. Really nestled that play area around the corner with some of the unprogrammed spaces kind of surrounding that space for different types of play as well. And approaching Lombard from that corner, you can see that how we express that prominent view, repeating the same architecture moves that we've done in the front here as well. And here are some of the outdoor precedents, outdoor learning spaces precedents that we're going to be planning on using for this project. Some of this might be familiar to you, as some of these are Baltimore City Schools projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you and your team for a very clear presentation and well organized. I think we'll jump into Q&A, questions and answers. I think some of it will be clarifying for certain things perhaps that we didn't catch. Others will be asking you to elaborate on some of your design intent. I'd like to kick that off. I have a few questions here that I'm suspecting that the rest of the panelists probably have, so I want to make sure that we address them early, and then I'll circle to the other two and get their questions as well right after that. So also, just to back up, thank you for your work. I think it's a very thoughtful overall design approach and well put presentation, your effort in really trying to solve for this urban site is evident. I think you do have a pretty complex site. You know, in a lot of cases, we have sites with really intense topography or other things. You know, in this particular case, it's really the urban nature and the edges that you started to describe that really play a big role in how this is shaped. So this is probably what's going to be the meat of our discussion today. But I just wanted to commend you before we get into all of the comments and try to find, you know, highlight the things that need further development. I wanted to make sure that the team knows that, you know, your thoughtful work is very much appreciated. I think it's a great start to the project. Can you please go all the way back to your initial analysis of the site? There's a diagram that you were describing in terms of the urban edges. Thank you for putting this together. It's not a very complicated drawing, but it's often omitted from a lot of presentations or even sometimes design processes. And it's extremely important because it should lay the groundwork for how some of the site decisions are being made. And so you've illustrated it very clearly. We understand your reading in terms of the urban edges, kind of the main destinations left and right, the vehicular and kind of, street hierarchy is very evident here. So there's really great stuff on this drawing that really truly describes what's happening there. I think there's a little bit more meat that could have gone on it, but I think we can tease that out in our discussion. But what my question really is, from this slide, we go into the next one, which kind of has the few iterations. Also, thank you for this. I think it's amazing to see how you've arrived where you did. It's super helpful. We understand how certain decisions were made, good or bad. However you ended up there, it's extremely helpful. So thank you for including that as well. But my question here is, because it wasn't really mentioned, and you might want to go to a different drawing after that, but what I'm looking for here is, how did you move from that initial analytical drawing? And it's not an analysis yet, right? The previous drawing is mapping. It's mapping all the edges. It's mapping all the site conditions, right? What's missing there is a moment of analysis that asks, so what? What do I deduct out of it? So how is it shaping my decisions? I think in these partie diagrams, we jump straight to, here's the public mass of the building, here's the private, and this is how we're figuring out the connectors, and the rest of it is open space. We're missing that little connection in understanding why and how does that first analysis inform your decisions, right? So I'd like to hear a little bit more about it, and perhaps not so much on the layout of the building, but perhaps more on the site organization. I think we can go to the follow-up slide, because after you told us about the partie, yes, there it is. So this is sort of what I'm looking for, but as an intermediate step. So if this is your proposal, how does the mapping of the existing condition, where is the analysis? How did you decide, okay, well, based on me mapping these urban edges, which is amazing, and it's wonderful that you're thinking about it this way, because you can't ignore that or skip it in this particular site. But I didn't catch, how did you decide that the public volume is going to be there, that the private volume is going to be there, the entry is going to be right there, that there's going to be this line cutting through it visually towards the park, and everything else is going to be open space. Can you elaborate a little bit of how did you actually end up with this site organization?
Sure. So we did explore multiple iterations even before we started laying out this site. We did explore what if we relocate the kind of neighborhood scale. The instructional wing on the north end here as part of an approach, while putting the larger volume spaces on the south here. And with that iteration, we were not able to hide effectively the service road, not having that kind of prominent view to it. Want to make sure it's hidden and away from kind of views of the adjacent buildings here, being kind neighbors and not giving them a view that's just, the back of the house. I think the best approach here is to align it with kind of this, there's a back of house area as well next to City Springs Park here. Having that aligned with that street and having that kind of closer to that and tucked away from that corner made sense for us. And selecting Caroline Street as the main access. I think it just made the most sense rather than having it off a one-way street. We located this pass through as I think this was part of the kind of evolving design as we go back here. I think part of our earlier design, we didn't have that opportunity here to cut through the building and bring you straight back to the part, which kind of makes the building almost like a blockage, blocking that access from the front of the site to the back of the site here, and something that's we desired early on in the design, but we weren't able to achieve until we get to the later iteration of the project here. So we were happy that we were able to achieve that. If you notice, most of the stuff stopped in the middle in the earlier design, but towards the end here, we were able to make sure that access from the front to the back is a clear cut and a simple circulation pathway that cuts through the building here. And want to make sure that it is located on the center of the building. We don't want approach where South Walkers is further away from the Northern Walkers here as well. So having that center just made sense to us, and really bringing the access towards the middle creates for a better main entry, in my opinion.
So this decision of locating the public programming towards the north and the private towards the site was driven by the loading dock, by the service access?
No, I mentioned earlier that it is also driven by what's happening on the context on the civic scale happening on the north end here. Having larger volume spaces kind of on the south here, and right next to the multifamily housing, which has smaller architecture moves, smaller scale moves. I think it makes more sense to have it react to that civic volume located on the north here. And we even have an iteration where I think we studied the cafeteria right on this corner to allow views to the City Springs Park. However, the topography does not allow that due to nature that this portion of the site is slightly higher. So having it here, be able to access, be able to have that sill level kind of closer to the ground, made the most sense for us as well. But yeah, the main reason why we located the larger public wing spaces here on the north is to be able to react to what's happening on the context on the north here.
Okay. I think it's important to note that what you're calling the civic portion of the site is actually smaller volumes. The housing is 4 stories towards the south. So, and it's forthcoming. So it's significantly larger sort of architecture than what you're seeing kind of immediately around that corner. But what I'm going to latch onto here is that there's an impetus to have a program a little bit more public in nature, closer to the north portion of the site. Is there direct access to it, or does one still enter from the middle of the block to access those public uses, which you're calling more public and civic uses?
Let's go here. I think there is access to that northern portion, but from the back here when you park after. Sorry. Am I understanding your question correctly that we're providing access here? Or are you talking about this right here?
I'm trying to understand that relationship that you're describing of your more public uses relative to the civic portion or adjacency of the site. I'm looking to see if there's an actual connection. Like, let's say, is there a public facing program there? Is there a community space, a gathering space? And if so, how is it accessed? I'm just trying to understand that relationship that you're saying determines that that's where that program would go.
Yes. So most of like I said, the public use spaces are going to be located in that corner. There's no connection that's happening with the building on the north here. But the connection of uses, I would say, the auditorium and the cafe, having that for after hours and for evening use, locating that on the north portion here made sense to us.
Right. So my question is, do you enter through the lobby or do you enter somewhere else to access? That's what I was asking, just to understand how does one get there to these public uses?
Gotcha. Dave, were you saying something?
To answer your question, Pavlina, for security reasons, we're trying to consolidate entrances. So yes, everyone would be directed to the main lobby. We want to really control access into and out of the building. Really, the connection between these spaces is more going to be visual from the outside in terms of the scale of glazing and creating a clear presence of larger volumes through the massing moves that are on the outside of the building. So in the public spaces, we're going to have, less series of bays, more kind of grander volumes expressed, similar to, this church across the street. And then there's another one across the street from that where, walking down the street, you can tell just from looking at the scale of the building and how the windows are arranged that this is a large public gathering space. So that's really the connection when we're talking about scale. It's not necessarily the size of the building, but more how it's experienced and the kind of use of it is expressed on the outside.
And some of the articulation, because you're mentioning some of the glazing sizes, because that's one way to, we're bridging into comments, but that's one way to really bring that legibility that you're looking for, right? So there's
Absolutely.
a language of the classrooms and there's a language of these gathering spaces, and that's what you're expressing. Thank you very much for answering that. Related to that, and we're sort of segueing into the second conversation, so now I understand kind of your rationale between where you're putting certain pieces of the program. We saw through your iteration how you worked through kind of their connection in between, connection to the back. So we'll get to that in the comments as well. So can you please also now, and this is a good drawing between this one and the previous one that we looked at, now describe the circulation of the site. You have mentioned there's walkers from the south, from the north crossing the sidewalks, and they're all sort of arriving at that central gathering space, correct? At the lobby to the left. And that is also where students will be dropped off with buses. Correct. That's the only arrival area. And then you have mentioned on the right-hand side after hours, there is an entry kind of on the gym side. And then there's also another one. Can you describe a little bit more of when and how these function? And then I'd like to zoom back out to the site plan and really talk about how the entire site circulates from there.
Yes. So, talking about these two back entrance here, coming from the parking lot towards the back here, this is going to be a secondary entrance for staff and for any evening after hours use for people who are using the parking lot here, providing a direct access from that parking space really shortens the distance for the staff who will be parking in this area. This portion right here just brings you closer to that community space towards the middle if you are using this area. And if you are, crossing this path right here towards the middle, it just brings you closer to the community amenities specific to, after hours, OST spaces, community classrooms, and other community amenities that's provided by the school. There's just two different ways to access the building here.
And those are after hours or during school hours when, say, students are getting to the fields and to the outdoor learning spaces. These are more controlled entries of certain times. Understood. Can you go to the site plan, please, that we were at as a diagram, just to track that through the rest of the site? All right, so this is the axis that we're seeing in yellow. There's another entry kind of from the parking lot. And can you talk to us a little bit about the rest of the circulation? Like, one question I had was this big green dashed line. Is that a visual connection to the park? Is it a physical connection? Is anyone actually crossing Lombard to get to City Spring Park? Is there I see that it's dashed here in orange. There appears to be a crossing path across Pratt Street. So we're trying to understand specifically how the rest of it really functions and at what times of the day and who's accessing all these different areas. And as you do that, please also describe what portion of the site is fenced off, because we understand that, just like you were saying in the front, you don't want people to gather. I'm getting a feeling that you probably don't want them to gather in the back either. So we would like to understand how the access points through the site work as well.
Sure. The current discussion right now with City School set, we are going to be fencing off anything from Bethel and all the way here to the edge of East, kind of edge of the stormwater here and along East Pratt. we're not planning on fencing off the parking lots currently. And then there's no direct access right now crossing Lombard Street to City Springs Park as the main entrance to the park. The City Springs Park is currently fenced off along here with one main entrance located somewhere in this corner. So just having an access from south of the site to be able to cross that through through Bond Street here, be able to traverse through the site, I think made sense to us. But programmatically, I don't think we had the discussion yet if we are going to be closing off that path completely or we're allowing public use for that yet.
So the big green dash line doesn't exist. There's no connection to City Park. And then the one across to Pratt Street, is that a signalized crosswalk? Is that an actual crosswalk there? Like something that students and families can make? No, not there, to the right where...
Right here?
Right there. Mm-hmm.
No, there's no signal right now there.
Would it be, it's considered like mid-block, right? Because it's sort of, it's Bond Street there, but it sort of dies into the school. It tees into the school site, but there is no crosswalk there currently. So it sounds like that very prominent green line isn't a physical connection. It is some kind of a visual connection, I imagine, between kind of the axis of Bond Street all the way into City Springs. And then it sounds like you're fencing off the southern portion and the east portion of the site. So would the fence run kind of between the field and the parking lot and then somehow come back to Lombard and close off the rest of it there?
I don't think it's gonna go across Lombard. It's just mostly going north-south and L-shaped from Bethel.
No, not across Lombard, just across to the left.
Yeah, across the top of the field and between the parking lot and the field.
Right.
Yes. So the field would be enclosed.
And so what happens after that was my question. Is the fence coming back up to Lombard, or I'm trying to understand what edges you're creating?
So the one edge, turn my camera on, one edge would be around the field, and then the outdoor play areas would also be fenced. More as a boundary for the students, wouldn't be a tall fence, but to create a boundary there.
Oh, so you're thinking that the green space that's between the field and the educational outdoor spaces, that is open to the public? Someone would be able to walk across there without the fence? So there'll be fence on the right for the field and fences on the left for the education spaces?
Right, and because Bond Street remains well, I guess we would restore it to a right of way. So there would be the option to walk through the site, but be secured from the school areas.
Okay, I think I understand. I think it needs to be illustrated and expressed in the drawings so that one can really start to see how it shapes the site. And maybe it is in the 3D. We'll take a look at the massing again. I think it's important to study those. When you look at the massing of the building, it's important to mass the site. I think the fences are necessary, especially when it comes to educational spaces, because you're dealing with young students and they need to be protected during class and after. Similarly, fields also need to be secured, but how does that shape the site and what kind of edges it creates in this urban environment is equally important. So we'll get to that in the comments section, and we'll discuss more of the fencing and the urban edges there. I think I have a slightly better understanding of what's intended in terms of circulation and arrival. I understand that the parking lot is primarily for visitors and staff at this point, and that most students will be arriving on foot or by bus. Is that correct? Is there any student drop-off the area that's dedicated for parents dropping off students? Does that happen? What percentage of the student body is it expected to do that?
So right now we're going off of the data of the current school, and it's very heavily skewed to walkers. I think there are 5 students total that come off of bus. And it's, I think, 2 buses and 1 van. So that vehicle drop-off zone we were imagining at the front is really to serve both buses and parents dropping off.
So you're anticipating a pretty low bus volume, hence it's only 2 bus lengths.
Yep.
How about
Exactly.
the parent drop-off? What percentage of the 800 students do you anticipate getting dropped off by parents?
So
Roughly,
that's
just a general
it's
idea.
tough
Yeah.
to generalize, especially considering, it's a known quantity here that when a new school opens up here in the city, a lot of folks want to bring their students there who maybe aren't in the walk range, who weren't considering in the past. Right now we would envision, I'm not even remembering what numbers we've projected. I think that's something maybe we'll need to look into a little further and maybe send you an email with some numbers on that, if that'd be acceptable.
No, we'll make recommendations. I'm just asking in case you know and you've accounted for it in the design, but it sounds like it hasn't been addressed yet. So we'll just make a note to look into it and study it in particular things to watch out for, especially because Pratt and Lombard are arterial roads. So you can imagine a pretty high traffic volume in the mornings at the same time when students are getting dropped off. So I think putting some thought into that and accommodating for some of it now would be really important.
Absolutely. We'll make sure we have that kind of resolved, and when we come back the second time, have more
Understood.
information for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I have more questions, but they'll be covered, I'm sure, by my colleagues. I want to give them some time for them to also address all of their questions. So I'd like to start with Kevin. Kevin, what are your questions for the design team?
Thanks. Yeah. A couple, like they're kind of, I guess, all over the place, but I think you addressed a lot of the perimeter questions that Pavlina asked. But I do think it will be helpful to get like a very clear sort of perimeter diagram for both the park to the north and the site, just so we can really fully understand that. And I guess in terms of drop off, I mean, again, you answered that was my other big question. But if it turns out that it's skewed heavily towards vehicular drop offs, I mean, I know that does happen, like you said, if parents from across the city start bringing their kids here in unexpected quantities. Thinking about like the one-way loop and how how a parent could pull over safely if that drop-off zone in the front is occupied by 2 vans and a couple cars, just how that works along the edges. I just think it might be interesting to as you move forward to think about that, but I'm not sure that I have. It sounds like you don't quite have that the data yet on that, so maybe that's not a super relevant question. Do you have you provided any bike facilities or locating anything for students or family or staff who want to bike there? Is there somewhere on the site that accommodates that?
So we will be providing outdoor bike racks. Currently, the design doesn't accommodate any indoor bike storage facilities. I don't think that's typical of what we provide in schools, but certainly outdoor bike racks in that kind of welcoming entry plaza area that we're trying to create, I think would be appropriate.
Yeah. And I guess another question, going back to the right of way, and you began to address it, but I mean, are there specific legal parameters about maintaining an unobstructed or ungated throughway, or is that something that that you would like to achieve, or is it not mandated at all?
That's something that we would like to achieve. We see what is going on in the city with this new park being created to the south, and we want to be a part of the public spaces to the greatest extent possible while keeping our students safe. So that's more of a goal that we've brought rather than a regulatory requirement.
Okay, so then that diagram with a right of way 40, like, is it? I mean, it's required to. It's required to at least be visual. Is that what it is, or just not built on? But there's no requirements specifically around like perimeter access or security. Is that what you're saying?
It's a utility right of way.
It's utility right of way. Okay, so got Got it. All right. And then could you actually just go to one of the project perspectives that showed the front of the main entrance of the building and just like clarify again? I know you mentioned there were some outdoor learning spaces. I just wanted, I didn't quite catch where those were. Is it on that lowered section of the roof above the main entrance?
Correct.
Okay, so that's actually that's an outdoor classroom space or outdoor learning space. Okay, got it. I just wanted to make sure that was understanding that correctly. I think everything else Evelyn had covered, so thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Osborne, what are your questions for the design team?
Sure. If you can go back to that site plan again, and I know the team is experiencing your first roasting here, but nonetheless, hopefully you bear with us. It's important that we understand your project thoroughly. So I think we're recognizing that there's a challenge along Caroline Street, and in terms of the bus drop off, the pedestrians arriving, as well as their parents drop off. But I'm going to kind of ask the question a little bit differently. Again, maybe you can go to the first floor plan. I think what I'm trying to understand to help you with how you can improve that hierarchy, and these are not comments, it's just a question at the moment. The sequence of how the school intends to operate. For instance, in the morning, you have all the students arriving. Is it that from what I can see here on this plan, the intent is for them to just arrive, however they arrive, and launch into that first floor lobby area? Isn't there like a sequence where the students or some of the students are gathered up, organized with the teachers or whomever, and then shepherded off to a location, whether it's an auditorium, the various classrooms, etc.? And if that's the case, where are they intended to gather?
Yeah, so with this being a kindergarten through 8th grade, there are those younger students who, oftentimes at the kindergarten level, pre-kindergarten level, they'll meet their teacher and be kind of walked to their classroom. So I guess we were envisioning for that, that would more likely than not happen in the lobby, which I believe is the way it's currently happening at this school, rather than having them hanging out outside on the street. We started with that large entry plaza as we kind of walked through the diagramming of our mindset, and that was one of the reasons for having that. But through kind of discussion, the stakeholders involved really felt that bringing people into the building as quickly as possible was the more appropriate way to go here. So we do have kind of the lobby space as well as some kind of gathering spaces. Those areas that are shown as CLAs, those are not enclosed rooms. Those are kind of open corridor space that can be used for breakout later. So these are kind of rally spots that we can, create inside the building for that kind of gathering up before classes.
And you figure that for a school that's going to house up to a little over 800 students, that lobby is appropriately sized to handle that. And then the flip side is we live in an unfortunate age where you need to bring students out of the building and have them gather very quickly based on all sorts of crazy incidents. Have we had thoughts in terms of how are they going to deal with that? Is that we just bring them to the sidewalk, or we shepherd them out the back door towards the field? Is there a thought process associated with that's actually built into this design?
Yeah, I think in those cases, we would be taking them out in the back to the fields and these kind of outdoor areas that we've kind of nestled inside of the building, inside the C shape, the outdoor learning, outdoor play area. In those scenarios, we don't want to put these students out in the public right away. We want someplace a little more securable. So that's
and the entry sequence would be somewhat spread out. We offer breakfast at all of our schools. So there would be a proportion of the student body that would be arriving prior to the official beginning of the school day to go to the cafeteria for breakfast.
Got it.
And we
And
will
then
have a door at that cafeteria as well. I know it's not the main entrance, but there is the ability, as one of our exit doors from the cafeteria to have that serve as, entry point for students who are arriving for breakfast.
Sure, and just two more questions. One, again, related to that entry arrival sequence, but from the perspective of a kindergarten student. More than likely, whether it's walk up, drop off, etc., those are the students that are going to always be accompanied by somebody when they arrive at school, right? So there's a handoff, and is it that the parent is expected to go all the way into the building to take them to the class, or you just pointed out there's going to be a teacher that's there that will do that? But there's a number of kids that are pretty young, and I'm just a little concerned that the kindergarten is all the way in the back wing, but all of the entries occur way up central to the block on Caroline Street. So there's a time lag that's going to occur there. And for some reason, if that parent has to wait for a teacher to shepherd that kid over, then you can see the buildup of traffic potentially that will occur in the drop-off area. Simply just the logistics of that occurring. So, and I'll kind of address this in my comments, but it's a question. I don't know that you have an answer for it, really, but it's just something to think about. And then my final question really is related to the landscape. I think Brian mentioned that there's a desire to introduce trees that are more in the family of canopy trees. But somehow there was a rendering late in the set from the kind of like from Bond Street and Pratt, looking towards the field and towards the back of the buildings. If you can probably go to that. I'm trying to understand, based on the programming of the outdoor areas, where would those canopy elements go? Because I thought I heard you say, Brian, that, well, you want these things elevated somewhat, so if one kid wanders off, they can find their way back to the group, or potentially, there's visibility. So are these where are these canopy trees?
Most of the canopy trees are to screen the parking lot, provide shade for the parking lot. And in the exterior areas, like you see near the field, we're not putting very many canopy trees where the dashed line is, where the B is, between the fields and the play area in the building. Those would be more of the smaller ornamental trees, the crepe myrtles, the dogwood, something like that.
Got it.
Those were providing a little bit more screening and a little bit more enclosure rather than a heavy mass in the middle.
Understood. And then finally, you've not even talked or mentioned anything about the field. I guess from its configuration, it probably is obvious, but not always to me. Is this an essential part of the program, or is this kind of like something that's desired, meaning the track and the actual field that's there?
That is something that's a pretty essential part of their program here. So their existing school, they have the same setup here. And they have a pretty strong emphasis on athletics as a part of their kind of leadership-oriented curriculum. So we want to make sure we're providing them with the same opportunities that they have currently for the way their school operates.
Thank you so much. Sorry it took me a while to get through this, but thanks.
No, I appreciate the questions.
Back to you, Pavlina.
Thank you, Osborne. Thank you for your answers and for explaining some of the rationale. We'll spend the rest of the time of the presentation sharing some of our thoughts and comments for the project. And Osmar already mentioned it sounds like a roast because we're asking a lot of questions. We have a very limited amount of time to understand how you got where you got, and I think we have a much better idea after all the questions. So thank you for this and for bearing with us. The rest of the comments we'd like to share would mostly reflect sort of this external analysis of your work so far, taking into account everything you've told us in terms of why things are the way they are and the certain decisions you made. It's important to consider all of these. Not all of them are going to be something you can necessarily bring into the project, but we do ask that you study and reflect and review all of these comments, even if it looks like in the beginning as something like, oh, we've already thought about that and it didn't work and therefore it's not a thing. We ask you to reconsider it for very obvious reasons. And again, we don't expect that absolutely everything is going to result into a revision or anything else to the project, but we do ask that improvements are made along certain very specific lines. I'd like to kick it off back with the site plan and our discussion of the urban edges, their response to them, and the creation of the new urban edges. So again, it's wonderful to see that one starts with that kind of reading of the urban environment. It's absolutely important and it's critical to really creating a thoughtful solution. And I think some of your design decisions on the site have been informed by this. But it seems to me like maybe because there's no drawings that illustrate it or really iterations on a little bit of this bigger picture scale. And it's easy when you're under the gun and you're really trying to solve the project in many ways, inside out and outside in, that sometimes, getting back out to the big picture at some point needs to happen in order to really make sure that some of the big goals that you established for the project are actually getting delivered. So now that you've really solved through a lot of the challenges here and, understood kind of what works and doesn't work for the site or what works for the building, doesn't work for the building, I think it's important to take a step back and take a look and see, okay, so what is it that we're creating and how does it respond to some of this urban edge analysis that we did in the beginning and evaluate, and I think that's what we're going to do here. And we're going to offer some suggestions to really push it to kind of one step further, another level, because I think it's important to always go back and see, not only am I trying to address my goals that I've established for the project, but am I actually doing it? And other specific things that I need to continue to develop in order to make sure that that happens. So some of the comments that I have are related to the existing conditions, the response to those, and really evaluating kind of what is the new lay of the land that's offered after the project that's imagined it's built as close to what you've wanted it to be. I think it's a perspective because what you'll find on the site today is mostly the result of years and years of decay and abandonment. So, the edges of Bethel Street that have been eroded beyond recognition as compared to, say, a few blocks south, is directly a result from all of these blocks, not being inhabited for a long time, and even before that, not, sort of really being invested into. So we have to be careful that when we respond to those edges, we don't just think that this is how this is going to be in perpetuity. I think it's important to see your project similar to how the rest of Perkins is happening and everything up north as a catalyst for this area. So I honestly don't anticipate Bethel remaining in this condition and in this kind of state of vacancy and abandonment for much longer once the school is completed and once the rest of the projects continue to get built out at Perkins. So there's a level of thinking here about what's there now as an urban edge that I'm reacting to and what's actually going to be the nature of the urban edge once my project is there and what I can anticipate happening. The reason why I bring this up is because currently there's no analysis on this drawing or even identification of that edge. And it seems like it's considered, it's just a dead alley with nothing happening there. And I can track in the design scheme how that's completely already dealt with in a certain way. You've already accepted from this drawing that there will be some kind of a very long fence that runs along that. And I want to give pause to that decision and to that really big default thinking, because so long as there's a big fence running along that, that really starts to affect what happens in the future along the Bethel Street and how that gets developed further. I think there's a certain level of responsibility once these redevelopment projects happen, is that whatever it is that you're putting in this redevelopment process, doesn't hinder the development or it affects the surrounding areas in a positive way. And the reason why I say that is because I was looking at the fence that's around the city school, the City Springs Park, and you had it in one of your slides, and it's this very tall black spiked fence. And right now this creates a very hostile edge around that whole park. And I'm going to imagine that maybe the fence you're going to put around the school is something a little bit less hostile, but nonetheless, it's a fence that runs for hundreds of feet, along kind of this urban environment. And so I want to caution the team, city schools, and to that extent, really ask planning perhaps to be a liaison here, and that there is a conversation, because I'm going to take a wild guess that City Springs Park is under the jurisdiction of Recreation and Parks. But we've had these conversations on other city schools that really border parks like that. But I think there needs to be a conversation between this project, between Baltimore schools and this design team, and everyone who has a say into the park on the other side, to really start to look at the nature and the quality of the urban environment that the fences and the edges create, and actually develop a cohesive strategy for improving that. I really don't think it's as simple as like, well, they have a fence that looks like this there, so this means that if we just run a fence in a similar way, that's just automatically going to improve things. I'm extremely skeptical that that is the case. So it's I understand why this fence is there today, and it does have to do with the abandonment, with the vacancy, with all of that. But that is not the kind of environment that all of this investment that's happening on the Perkins side and even on the school side is really looking forward to create. Think of it from this perspective. After all the millions of dollars that are going to be spent here, if in the end of the day we're looking at a street that has these kinds of fences on both sides, have we really spent the money in the best way possible? So I think it's really, really important to consider that, to not accept things as the status quo, to not replicate the status quo, and to really push for something that is fundamentally different kind of as an environment. We would like that every single resident and every single student that comes to the newly constructed neighborhood experiences the city park and the wonderful grounds of the new elementary middle school in a way that's consistent with how others experience it and other newly constructed schools throughout the city and throughout the country and elsewhere. I think we need to look at that picture in the upper right and say that is not really something that we want to work towards. And I think that starts to really question then that initial diagram, really being critical towards what kind of edges are there, what are the edges we want to create in our project, and what the impact of that would be, and how that will in turn then change the context and really change those edges as well. It's a really important thing. It's a high level conversation to have, but you will see in the end, it comes down to like where the fence goes. And with that, where does the entry to the parking lot go? All of these decisions actually start to become that much more critical, but they are coming from an attitude of like, no, that isn't just a dead edge there that doesn't exist on the map. And we can't just like back up everything into it and put a fence on it. I want to emphasize that equal care needs to be taken care of around the entire project. I can tell right now that so much thought and care is put all along the west edge, and it kind of gradually erodes as it gets towards the east. which just happens to back into the Little Bethel Street, which has a lovely quality blocks down below. It can have a lovely quality here too, and it's only half a block away from Broadway, which will also benefit that whole corridor from this entire development. So it's not a backdoor. It really is the gateway to this massive investment that has the opportunity to really change the quality of the entire area in a radius. And I think it needs to be taken very seriously. And you need to understand that your role is much greater than that one rectangle that you're asked to design. So that will then bring me to the site plan. If we can jump to that drawing. I think there are certain decisions on that one that feel a little bit more like accepting the status quo, like a little bit more like an afterthought, and a little bit more like simply paying lip service as opposed to actually putting pen to paper. It's difficult to show that big green line and, only to find out that it doesn't quite function yet, but it can, right? Your intentions are wonderful and they're commendable, but they need to be acted on. And I realize that it's not, don't take this is just the design team or just city schools. It's everybody. It does take collaboration and it does take a lot of conversations with a lot of different stakeholders. But I think it does need leadership. I think someone needs to say, it's easy when you have a master plan and someone comes and draws it and says, this is what we want to accomplish. And then it leverages that vision and that leadership and then pulls everyone on board and let's make it happen or not. It's important here to figure out is, who can take on the leadership of really allowing, and to your point, this idea of like, we want to be part of the park down south. We want the school to connect all the way to the park up north. So there needs to be a more concerted effort in really making sure that happens. And with that, of course, we want to understand what is the quality and the nature of the space that connects, the site north and south. From a point of view of safety and access, how does that happen across the arterial roads? And it does have to be a commitment. It does have to be, are there crosswalks? Is there traffic calming devices there that can really facilitate that? And even if it ends up being only a visual connection, then how does that happen? Because right now you're telling us, well, City Springs just has that fence across the street, but our entire access is leading into it and you can't cross it. So is there even a visual access there? Or not? Is there any kind of a connection? So it's important to really not just sort of put these on a piece of paper and sort of walk away. It's important to really see to what degree are we actually executing on a goal and on a desire that has, again, long-term consequences for not only for this project, but for the entire area. Other things that concern me around this plan is orienting the parking lot towards East Lombard Street, sort of in the long fashion. We generally try to avoid putting parking lots next to sidewalks in the city. It's really a pretty default lazy way of planning a site. It doesn't create a really great edge. It doesn't do anything for the pedestrian experience, especially when the curb cut is located along that same edge. So if you simply track East Lombard for the entirety of this project, you're starting from the corner that doesn't have any entries or any kind of activation. You're going to cut through the curb cut of a loading docks service area. You're going to continue down that side of what probably will be a fence because it's fencing off an educational area. We may or may not get some kind of an access, north and south through the city after that, through the site after that, and then we're hitting another curb cut and then another few hundred feet of, parking lot that doesn't have currently in the drawing any meaningful vegetated buffer or anything like that. It is not a very good urban edge. I mean, if you just narrate it that way, it's only marginally better than probably what's there now, considering that it's an abandoned building. I know the surfaces will be a little bit better on the new building, but in all of the effects of it, it is still more fence and it is still more curb cuts. And I think it's important to really go back to my previous comments and start to really examine what kind of urban creating along the book away from Broadway and really on the edge of all the other development happening in this area. It is the same condition, is only slightly better on the south edge because the building is a little bit longer and you don't have any curb cuts. But of what I'm getting there, it's also mostly going to be fenced off right up to the edge maybe of the site, or maybe the fence is a little bit more concealed. Maybe there's a more generous landscape area that is kind of bordering Pratt, but we don't know that. Because it's not illustrated and it didn't sound like there's like a lot of thought being put into it. Lastly, there's Bethel Street with the continuous fence and really zero activity, zero activation, zero use. I'm really concerned about kind of the type of activity or even the lack of it that is created there. So I think the site really needs a lot more attention and a lot more thought with respect to what the end result there is. I realize that there's sort of these elements that are being placed within it, but you started the conversation about the edges and you need to finish it. So you're responsible for the kind of edges that you're creating in the project just as much as you're analyzing the ones that are there now today. Lastly, with respect to edges, I want to comment on the other portion where the building is located. I think you'll hear it from a lot of the other panelists, and I have it even in the notes from Sharon, is that I think the entry level sequence needs a lot more thought and finesse. There's an issue both with accommodating traffic. I can get into the details of it, but I'm hoping maybe others will, and if we don't, I can at the end. But there's this idea of someone's getting dropped off. There's an immediate few feet of an area where you literally open the car or the bus and someone is coming out, and then there's someone else who's just walking on the sidewalk, either trying to get to the building or just across. And right now, all of these things are just kind of colliding into one very narrow, small space in front of the building. Whatever the hang up about people gathering and how that space is being used, is fair. However, you still have to solve for some of the functional needs of that entire sequence. Related to that, of course, when it comes to the site, this whole drop-off condition needs to be duly considered, especially when it comes to parents queuing and where the students are getting dropped off. Again, we're dealing with very young student population. It can't be anywhere on the sidewalk. Will parents be walking them all the way to the front door? What happens to those cars idling? Again, you're surrounded by pretty heavily trafficked streets. We need to see all of that being resolved. I see that you're helpfully putting a picture in front of it. And we can discuss that when we get a little bit closer to that area. We'll come back to that after the other panelists have spoken if we need to recover this again. So all of those things need to be studied, illustrated, and planned for, really, because it's a new building. You want it to function beautifully for the next 30, 50 years. So those are all important things to consider. The last thing I'll mention is that I am questioning the building and the classrooms specifically, and a lot of the spaces being built up right up to the property line and to the edge of the sidewalk. I am a little bit less concerned about what you call the public uses kind of towards the north of the building. I am more concerned about the classroom wing. In many city schools that I've been to and I've visited, there's been typically that impetus to blind and block the windows as not to distract the students. And I'm worried about having all of the windows to the classrooms directly against the sidewalk with very little buffer or anything in between, and what that would do to the actual experience inside the classrooms, and if that would result indeed in blinding and blocking some of the windows for that purpose, which will then impact the quality of the experience inside. Even if that's the case, maybe the windows are a little bit higher. I don't know. I think I feel like that needs to be addressed. But I'm also wondering from a purely urban experience perspective, if it is possible to set back that building a little bit and create a vegetated edge around it just to ease that really close proximity to a very busy road and the immediate sidewalk against it. Again, on the cafe, and kind of kitchen side, I'm less concerned because there's less hours of the day that one would spend there at any given time. I think the classroom experience is slightly different in the sense of it feeling like this is your home base, it having a dignified view out the window that is not blinds or something really high where you can only see the sky. And again, you're part of the city, you're on an urban site. What is the kind of experience that you want students to have looking out the window? I think the pre-Ks have this wonderful view into the outdoor play. I want to make sure that the rest of the classrooms, especially on that ground level along Pratt Street, also have a quality experience. So all of these edges, all that said, is something that I really encourage the team to think hard about and to make strong design decisions that help the project succeed. It is very easy for it to become an afterthought. It is very easy for it to look good on a drawing like that, but really to have serious consequences when it comes to how the site is being used, how it's experienced, and what its impact is on the rest of the area. Related to that, I would only say I have for the landscape team, and I separate that because I have a feeling that a lot of the kind of this initial planning is driven by the architecture team, and I think this is a good point to really, if it hasn't been done earlier, to really have that conversation with the landscape team at hand, and allow, in fact, for certain decisions that are driven by the landscape to allow the building to respond to those, and not necessarily just with materiality, windows, articulation, and entry location, but actually with some of the massing in order to facilitate how that's happening. I heard equally very commendable goals and aspirations from the landscape team. I think your narrative about this movement-driven and seasonal and visual interest and stimulating environment was wonderful, but it's completely not visible in the current drawing. So there's really no way of us of understanding how you're actually accomplishing that. I think as a matter of design process, it's important to find examples that do what you're saying that you're trying to do, not as a matter of mimicking that, but to really understanding when you say movement and motion through the landscape, what does that mean and how is that accomplished in actual three-dimensional space or in the space that you're working with. Right now, I just see curved paths and, some of the more decorative trees and some of the other planting, but I don't quite get yet how you're accomplishing some of the other bigger goals that are more experiential. I see that there's no plants at all in the outdoor learning environment. I've seen it in some other city property projects that they're specifically asking for no plants in those areas because of maintenance. But it does create an area immediately around the building that is just hard paving. And in fact, the vegetation ends up being something that you see in the distance and you don't quite experience or you're immersed in your daily life. And that's how I read the plan currently. If you can switch to the landscape plan, I see a lot of hardscaping all around the building, very limited vegetated area along that edge. And again, some of the conversation about shade trees or other trees is pretty limited. I think it's something that needs to be studied three-dimensionally. You need to study those layers and edges that are created not just around the site, but through the site, especially since you have a clear edge between the fields, between the educational areas, that path that runs north and south. All that needs to be a lot more intentional and a lot more clear. The fence needs to be three-dimensionalized. We need to see how, just the way you're massing the building, how are you massing the site? Because you are, and it's going to make a big difference of how all of these outdoor spaces are experienced. Right now, we see it mostly as a two-dimensional landscape layout, and it feels like it's just filling the green areas that are left outside of the building and the hardscape area, and it's not really speaking movement, motion, immersion, curiosity, discovery, and all of these other things that you were talking about. So we support you and commend you and root for your entire team to meet those goals, but they're not evident in the plan yet. And it needs to be developed and considered more thoroughly. The last comment I have is for the massing of the building. I think that's very thoughtfully conceived for the extent to which you're sort of differentiating between the classroom wing versus what you're calling the civic wing. There's a really nice scale to both of them. The masses do break as you've intentioned them kind of relative to what's happening in the neighborhood. It's a very thoughtful approach. I think there's work to be done when it comes to that central area and how that articulates. I think right now there's a little bit of sameness to the two prominent corners that you were describing, the classroom wing and that civic wing. It sounded better when you were talking about that there's a differentiation in the scale and the articulation. It's not quite there yet. I think both corners are very heroic. I think okay to underplay the south volume, especially, and give it its own recognizable language, and to really allow then the north volume to shine and read as something different. I will caution you, though, that even in your diagram where you're talking about prominent corners in the urban environment are there because they have hierarchical significance, because there's actually something happening on those corners. So they become nodes, they become important pieces of the block, important pieces of the legibility of the building. I think right now, by moving the entry central to the building for this idea of kind of being centrally located from the corner of the block from north and south, which may be meaningful in some way to somebody, but it doesn't offer that same urban legibility because it essentially moves all of the energy from the corners into the mid-block, and it leaves the corners as just inert masses that are now having to work extra hard to give this celebratory or prominent kind of quality to the corner without actually offering much kind of programmatic use. I hope that at least on the cafeteria side, there's, like you're saying, more pronounced transparency and a different read to really allow that corner to read as if something's happening there, and maybe revisit the plan on the south volume where the classrooms are and see if you can move some of the program that has a little bit more of a kind of public quality or something like that to give that portion of the building, actual prominence. Like I'm looking at the lower left corner, and that's kind of very heroic and very big, but it's not clear really what's happening behind it. I think the massing is successful, and it definitely is a great start, and it can continue to develop along those lines. But having kind of these very distinct and clear languages to the use of the building will help further differentiate what you're intending to accomplish. I'll pause here. I have things that are a little bit more detailed. We'll see if we get to it. I think some of my colleagues will probably address a lot of these, but I want to give them time to really go through all of their comments. Kevin, what are your comments for the team?
Thanks, Paulina. Maybe go back to just the overall site plan, just have that up as a background, and maybe starting from the big picture and then working in. I actually feel like you've really made some sound site planning decisions here. I mean, I guess if I was handed a blank sheet here and said let's begin thinking about like where you would put significant elements of a school on this particular block, which is a really interesting block, right? It terminates a street that ends. It's next to a city park, and I would say there's one attitude could be let's face the reading of the entrance, say to the City Springs Park, and just test it. What does that mean? What does it do? It kind of puts a lot of pressure on rethinking in a way like the park and like letting it live up to a bigger kind of civic dialogue between civic school and park together. But it looks like because of the right of way, you probably even if you thought of that, it is probably tight to kind of squeeze it in there and still leave without doing some weird disconnects. It kind of maybe just doesn't lend itself in the way that the amount of programming you have to fit on the site works. So it kind of then makes sense. I think the only other real clear alternative is the way you did it, which is the front entrance on Caroline. And I do think again, this is a civic architecture, not commercial or residential. So I think the idea of the entrance in the middle, it makes a lot of sense just from a practical perspective, right? You have parents dropping kids off, and you don't want them doing it at the corners, right? That makes a lot of unsafe conditions. So in some ways, I think this diagram led you to just like a very basically sound planning decision. Though the one thing I will say that bothers me about your analysis is that, and even some of the our discussion about it so far is that what's the name of it? The alley, which isn't really, is it? What's the name of that
Bethel.
street? Bethel. Sorry, it's not a street. It's called a street, but it's an alley, right? And its dimension is an alley. It's functioning as an alley. So
No, it's a street. It has properties that are fronting and they have addresses on it, and there's houses that run north and south in the area. It's not a utility alley. It's because it's part of the old city. It's like you can see at the block south all of the properties that are fronting that.
I
They've
mean, I
just
was
been
just doing a Google
demolished.
walk, and it just looked like garages, and it looked like 10 feet wide. So
Because of the deterioration, but Bethel Street is a street, yeah. Alley
well,
Street.
As you get down to Fells, more closer to Fells Point, you get, a really cute little, it's alley width, but there's small townhouses, small row houses kind of lining it at a much smaller scale than our project, but it is very nice down there.
It's owners have owned these properties and have bought them waiting to build small houses on them when these bigger projects actually, improve the edges around it. So
yeah, well, okay, but that seems to be happening like kind of like south of here. I don't know. I mean, if you on these sites, it's basically. I mean, I don't know. It's functioning. It looks to be functioning as an alley, and those property lines look like they're the backs of streets that are fronting on. So it's not fronting on Broadway. But regardless of that, I think it's an opportunity to kind of to think of it that way. And I think building on Paulina's hesitation about your orientation of the parking lot, if you can now go to the site plan, I do think like the first sort of best practice kind of test one should do is like, what if all of the parking did happen along what's functionally at least an alley? And so could you do like a single loaded along Bethel Street along the east side, just one continuous row that allows you to kind of just have parking kind of coming in on the right, not sort of giving this undignified front to the city park, and the fenced or unfenced parking lot along Lombard, and just really kind of pushing your curb cuts, to what's functioning as an alley structure. I know that that's impossible to do for your service based on this kind of party, and I think it's it makes sense the way where you've put that in somewhere, someone dialogue to the other alley on the north, to the west of the city park. But I think that would, in fact, by doing that, it would, I think, give you a little bit more freedom in how you treat the open spaces and the field, and even like the field as it's shown, I don't know if it's like a gesture for a design reason or just because it's being compressed by that parking, that it's kind of skewing. And I think we all know that north-south orientation is optimal for this kind of field and playing, and minimizes evening glare and the seasons that these are used. I think along those veins too, like the location of the bleachers, again, like facing a west bleachers is sort of you'd end up not looking into the setting sun at the end of the night. So I think there's like a few kind of tweaks you could make with how you're situating the parking, getting the curb cuts off of Lombard, and making a more functional play space that is a little more comfortable for people that are coming for an evening game or an evening sporting event or something like that. So I feel like that's sort of like sort of bigger picture kind of like site things. I think the building massing, and I agree with the comment about trying to give a little bit of breathing room on the south side edge, just so you're not like literally like seeing just like 2 feet away from someone glaring into a classroom on the lower level. But I do really like I think there's a real logic to having that sort of marching of classrooms along that southern face and getting the great natural light and the daylight, and it fits in with like your massing strategy and all of that. And it makes sense to have the 2 floors stacked on the lowest portion of the site, and then the high ceiling single story on the higher portion of the site. So I think that, again, all these things seem to be working pretty well in tandem. I do think that I know that I can understand why the public schools doesn't want like a civic plaza at the front door, but I also am a little concerned that what you've kind of swung to the opposite direction of like could in fact end up creating some sorts of problems in the future or challenges in the future. And I just say this as a parent who's dropping kids off often at middle school and high school. And one thing that happened actually in recent times, and I don't know, again, I'm not in any way like a school design expert, but like at a certain point, like the school decided that their kids were going to have to check in, their middle school kids have to check in their cell phones, right? And so then that creates like a little line going in, and the lobby's not big enough. So then they decide, okay, well, let's let the middle school students like use the different door, which was never meant to be the front door. And so you're kind of utilizing 2 entrances. And and then schools often change their attitude towards parents walking their little kids all the way in versus having someone come out and bring them from the car. So like I guess we may never know what it's going to be like in 5 or 8 or 10 years, but I think not precluding a variety of those sort of situations from happening as you plan the initial building, which might mean that a slightly more generous and again, not a gathering space, it's more like a waiting, in between space, between, a lobby and whether that's inside or outside, I don't know, but it just seems like it's a little tight right now, and it might not allow for any kind of unknown future mix of security slash check-in slash and even like actually like post-COVID, the kids had to kind of look, stop in and check in and make sure that their parents had entered their their COVID test data for the day before. Just like weird things that happen that kind of cause these clogs at the front door. So I would just encourage you to look at that a lot more closely and make sure that this happens. And again, there's kids might be sitting at the front steps after school waiting for a ride from a caregiver. So those kinds of things sort of all have to happen in this very tight spot where you also have a bike lane coming through and then the drop off for the vans. So that just seems to be like a very critical like point where everything's sort of coming together and needs a lot more thought. I also think that the good. I think your architectural moves so far, like really well founded. I applaud you guys for going like net zero on this project. That's an amazing aspiration, and I think we know that sometimes when you're trying to achieve net zero, like over articulation of massing can actually be a hindrance. And I think that you're kind of keeping this relatively simple is smart and makes a lot of sense. And I don't think you don't have to be doing any kind of like major gymnastics on this. And it just seems like it sort of seems like it fits in your 3D massing views. So I think, again, with the exception of like pulling maybe that south facade back a little bit, it seems like that would be something to explore. And then finally, I'll end on the perimeter. We discussed it during the questions as well, but again, like this, if you have like an L-shaped fence, along Bethel and Pratt, like, why have the fence if it's actually not a fence between this? Like, what are we like? What is it achieving? Is the intent that it actually can all be fenced off, or you're actually like just fencing off that cut through path between, for the extension of Bond? I guess that goes hand in hand with how these public open spaces might be used by the community after school hours, and whether or not you want to allow flexibility for different kinds of policy and operations kind of decisions in that area, and what kind of community hub this becomes, and or can neighbors come run the track in the evening or not, and is it fenced off or not, and I think so. I guess, again, policy can change over time based on how the neighborhood reacts to this new place and how the neighborhood evolves over time. But you don't want to preclude, or you don't want to sort of start off with something that appears hostile. And I completely agree with Pavlina's comments about really like diving into this perimeter definition, all the way around. Because again, like, that park to the north, I mean, you should, that green dashed line that you showed in your diagram, it's great. Like it probably should be that way. And so is there a way that this project can influence, the connection to City Park in the future? So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. And then, there's some very basic things. Like I do think like, even if you end up not moving the parking, having more of a landscape buffer between parking and the field, or maybe doing, more of a landscape buffer, along Bethel, if there's not really any kind of program that can truly activate, that side of the campus. I think this should be, I think landscape is looking a little bit anemic. I know you have limited area here and a lot of program. I think there's something a little odd about the street trees, like on Lombard, like they look a little bit more like disjointed and irregular. There might be reason, I don't know, there could be fire hydrants or things that I'm not seeing in the drawing, but I think like the kind of the regularity that you're showing on Pratt, I think is going to help just give like more shade and consistency and all of that. So I don't know if I know you have more curb cuts on Lombard, but it seems like there might be a way to make that a little bit more consistent. And I think that's, and then also I think that, like sometimes I know a lot of schools are building in like landscapes that maybe celebrate the stormwater management and tell a little bit of a story there, or they might incorporate spaces for vegetable gardens. And again, that's obviously linked to the curriculum and the programming, and I have no idea where that's going, but maybe not precluding that from happening in the future, and saying this is, or set up a place that could accommodate that in the future seems like again like a best practice. A lot of schools are doing it, and it might be an interesting thing to include in the plan. I think I'll stop there. I think that something else might come, but maybe pass it on to Osborne.
Before we go to Osborne, I just want to tie up the parking and Bethel kind of conversation, because Kevin was onto something and I didn't mention this into mine. I would really encourage you to take a look at how the block south of here, Perkins, handled the parking and the edge along Bethel, because we had these conversations with them as well. They did orient parking along Bethel. It's a street. People are going to build row houses there, but ironically, in the alley streets like this is where people build houses with garages, because you can. It's much easier to do a curb cut along the Bethel streets than it is and less disruptive, along, say, something like Lombard, which has a much stronger pedestrian access kind of quality to it. So in the block south, you can kind of see it in some of your larger maps, but it's probably worth pulling up some of their last design presentations. The parking is indeed oriented along Bethel Street with decent screening and things like that, because it's a lot easier to really get in and out of Bethel and less disruptive but also because, ironically, if you can't put buildings or people or something like that, parking is the next thing that brings eyes and people there. And I think that's the bigger concern that I was mentioning earlier, is that if it's just a fence and there's absolutely no other activity, that there will not be a living soul necessarily that casually sort of occupies that edge on different times of the day. So having, to the extent possible, the parking oriented along that side will allow for people after hours to come park, use that street. The houses, that will come across the street will enjoy kind of some activity and view into the property, and then walk across, to the building. Please consider, if you can, reorienting the parking so it doesn't, in fact, take that whole edge and front the city park, but is more incorporated into the Bethel edge. It is also, it was studied at some point where it is just parking that lines, like sort of perpendicular parking that lines Bethel, so you can widen it on your property, like basically push in another 10, 12 feet so you can widen that driveway, and then you can park straight off of the alley as opposed to really creating this internal road. That might save you some space.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, Kathleen, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you're actually like sort of leveraging some public space for your own sort of circulation efficiency.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this doesn't necessarily erode the quality of Bethel, because on any other street, you have sometimes either diagonal parking or head-on parking, like in some of the smaller streets on the other side of Broadway. That happens, so it kind of duplicates that quality to where the street will feel wider, the cars will be parked across from the street. You can interrupt a couple of parking spaces just to add a little bit of a break between them with trees, but it's going to actually give you more space on your site because you're not creating that much more road internally. So it's definitely worth studying that whole edge, both from a kind of project efficiency perspective, but also from how it would affect everything around it. It will make a big difference. So I just wanted to recover that, because Kevin was touching on it in terms of actually reconfiguring it, and I didn't go into all of that. But at minimum, I think that if the parking stays on that edge, I would move the curb cut on Bethel. Because you have a very low traffic volume for that side, and it's probably not worth introducing it onto Lombard where, kind of crossing and, maybe students walking over. It just creates another curb cut for you between the service and this one. If you're located at least on Bethel, it would give it a little bit more of a smoother way in and out. So it's definitely more to consider along this edge. Sorry, I will pass it on to Osborne. I'm sure he has a number of comments as well. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. So I think you're hearing a very potent dialogue in terms of how to begin to address the conditions here, and ideas in terms of reorienting the parking is certainly a start. But I think there's a lot more to be done as well. Let's face it, the real challenge here is you've been handed a pretty large program. And, I believe the site can support the program. I don't think there's any issue with that. But your real constraint here is that easement that kind of cuts through the site. It cuts through the site in a very inconvenient way. So I think a lot of the moves you've made in many cases responds to that. However, I think there's another level of refinement that will even significantly improve it, but it's going to force you to kind of back up a little bit and re-examine some of the fundamentals associated with a project like this. For instance, the programmatic approach in terms of how the school is sequenced, access, etc. Definitely, what's happening along South Caroline Street in terms of the drop-off area, and I'll come to that in a minute. And you may have to begin to separate out those drop-off elements. But in addition to that as well, you still need to think about, and there was that early discussion in terms of, what's civic, what's private, how everything is oriented around this site. But when you kind of look at it, yes, the buildings to the south are residential, but those are multi-families. So to some extent, that's a kind of a commercial use, right? So I think the whole idea about the civic discussion really should be more centered around, and I think, I don't recall, Dave, you kind of stepped in and you explained it very well in terms of the relationship between the other types of uses, the church to the north, and how you view the Masson in that regard. So I think that kind of clarifies and explains it to some degree. So let's kind of take each of these elements very quickly in the essence of time. I think the biggest challenge on the block is the arrival sequence drop-off area. And what's forcing you to locate all of those elements on Caroline Street is, the fact that every other street is a one-way condition. And it's a one-way going the wrong way from the way you'd like to get out of your door from a car. So what can you do? There's only two things you can do to resolve that here. Well, three, but the third one we're not going to do. We're not going to change the flow pattern of the streets. So it forces you then to do one out of two things. Either occupy Caroline, which you've done, elected to do, or potentially you'd have to look for an opportunity to enter the site somewhere where you have the ability to drop off and get out of the site in a convenient manner without penalizing yourself in terms of taking a lot of the site for just circulation. I think there's an opportunity to still do that, right? But you have to do it in concert with which elements do you want to bring into the site and which elements you want to keep to the street side. My recommendation potentially would be because you've got three basic arrival sequences, pedestrians on foot, and you can kind of control where the pedestrians go, right? You've got the buses, and you've also got the drop-offs from parents, etc., the vehicles. It seems to me the vehicles are going to be the hardest ones to deal with, mainly because the frequency and because of the number of vehicles that would be coming here. I thought I heard the volume in terms of buses, it's really small, it's tiny. So what if the buses were able to pull into the site? And with all of the ideas you just heard in terms of reorienting the parking, perhaps it also takes realigning in a more orthogonal manner, north-south, the entire parking field, and then revisiting some of the geometries associated with that track, tighten them up a bit. So now you have a little bit more compressed of an athletic area, oriented in kind of a north-south direction that begins to fit and kind of move itself to some extent off of that easement. Now you're going to utilize that easement to provide access potentially for buses to come in. The buses are going to be seldom coming in there. Only buses are allowed to get in there. So you're not necessarily disrupting the connection between, let's say, the students and the playfield area. And it doesn't need to necessarily follow the exact orthogonal north-south direction of the easement. It can be somewhat curved as well. However, you shape that area and utilize it to still achieve some of the wonderful things you've organized here in terms of the learning areas, etc. What that does is it allows you now to free up Caroline and give you back a lot more curb length for drop-off, to the extent where you now need to investigate how or what is the best way of doing that. There's another concern that's hidden in here, and Kevin pointed to it, really, which is the bike lane that goes through. Is this bike lane bidirectional? Is it single directional heading north? I don't know, right? Hopefully it is. And if that's the case, imagine yourself as a mother, a young mother, dropping off a kid. And you know how these things are. Sometimes someone gets distracted, etc. You may have a person on a bike going through. Does the biker dismount to go through this block? Probably not. They're going to continue through. So you need to make a decision as to where that bike lane needs to really be relative to the drop-off area in terms of doors opening. It may be that the bike lane needs to move to the street side of the drop-off. So you need to work through a study of some kind that begins to identify that sequence of movement to figure out and understand which is the best elements to be at the curb edge versus which elements need to be street side. You good? Similarly, when you kind of look at the building here, and it's been pointed out, it really seems as though the building is filling up the lot. And I think it needs a little bit of relief as you've heard from the other panelists. I think the area really needs most of the relief, believe it or not, is on Caroline Street, because I'm looking at that entrance, and as you get out of a car, as you cross the sidewalk, very narrow area, you're going up a series of very steep steps to get up to a level so you can enter the building. And adjacent to that, you've got some kind of a ramping system. I think that's all just too congested and compressed. You need quite a bit of relief in that area. Right. So what I'm suggesting is if you can just go back to the previous, and then we'll come back to this, the previous slide, I want to point out something. So when you kind of look at where the church is fronting and aligning with Caroline, the setback, and then you look at the setback for the multifamily just to the south side of Pratt Street, it tells me your building probably needs to move in quite a bit, right? I don't think you need to be at the property line. And that now gives you an opportunity to help resolve that drop-off condition in the sense that you either now negotiate a much wider sidewalk, or you can potentially move a portion of the sidewalk in so you have a drop-off lane that's clear of the street, that allows the bike lane to still continue through, but you have safe communication or safe navigation between kids that are being dropped off, crossing the sidewalk and getting on and into the school property. So I think there's got to be some kind of a study through this area, and you will find that it's going to significantly improve that condition there. I'm not sure what I'm doing on time here, but the other thing that's a little bit of concern to me, again, we talked about the kindergartens and, the pre-K, et cetera. It just seems to me there's got to be a more convenient way for a mom or a dad or whomever, a parent, to drop off a kid and not have that kid have to traipse all the way through the building like this. Particularly when, as you kind of look at that classroom wing, it's not all at one level. I think there are 2 or 3 levels in there. So imagine someone having to leave a car, or even a teacher having to kind of take 1 or 2 or 3 students at a time, if they wait 5-10 minutes or whatever, and then have to walk them through that area to the pre-K rooms. But the pre-K rooms are all like at different levels, right? So there just seems to be a little bit of inconvenience in terms of how that sequence will work. And actually, you're seeing it here, how that sequence will work in terms of getting you from the lobby area to the classrooms for that age group of students. The older students, I'm less concerned about. The kitchen area, you've talked about it being at a higher elevation so you can get access to street. I think you said there's some ramping system in there that gets you down to the level of maybe the cafeteria or the service area to the kitchen. I mean, it seems like that's kind of one of the most that's one of the last places you want to introduce a significant grade change between, let's say, the service area and the kitchen, because you're moving so much equipment and elements in there. And perhaps I'm just not understanding it, but I would have liked to see those areas kind of in a more common elevation. And I understand, the site is what it is, so you have to be able to work through that. My final set of comments are related to the exterior of the building, the massing. If you can probably go to a view that shows, let's go to the view from Pratt and Caroline. Yeah, that one. So, so two things here. The first, I think in terms of the overall massing, it's coming together nicely, and I think you've heard that. However, as I kind of look a little bit more closely at that entrance, does the entrance really need to have that kind of eroded kind of a element? Right. I think there's a little bit of conflicting stories being told or attempted to be told here, right? In the sense that, is there a view where you kind of look at the entrance a little bit more closely? Perhaps not. Okay, yeah, there it is to the bottom left. Sorry. When I kind of look at that, right, I think the lower masses could be better expressed if the glazed element that identifies the entry into the school is extended over behind that lower element. So that entire lobby area should just be all glazed. Even if there are rooms adjacent to it, perhaps those rooms take on clerestories. So the read or the expression of that low volume is very pure, it's very clear, and it's further anchored by the larger volume to the back. Similarly, I'm having an issue with that sort of a horizontal. I don't know what it is. It looks like an awning. I mean, maybe you need to rethink that and think of it more as some kind of a sunscreen that aligns and creates a natural datum, maybe at the head of all of those windows. So I think those are just subtle things that you can do to improve the quality of the massing here. And it's going to help you in terms as you go through with your material selection later on. My biggest concern, though, is the elevation along Pratt Street. And I think, Chester, you said early on that the reason for, and it's not the massing, it's probably how the fenestration is being handled. And it's probably still very early in the process. So I'm going to frame it in the context of, I'd like you to investigate an alternative, right? And what I mean by that is, I heard you say, well, you're trying to respond to the residential character and the approach that they took, which is breaking up the masses, as you can see in the elevation to the top left of the slide, where they've created almost these kind of a row home pavilion type moves. And you're kind of taking that and you use the word mimicking, right? As in you're implementing that through the fenestration. But I think that's a little bit too simplistic, right? To the extent where it's not just mimicking, but it's almost like mimicry. So what I would suggest is it's important to recognize what's actually happening with those residential buildings across the street, but I would urge you to reinterpret that. And what I mean by that is perhaps the three tiers of the building need to be expressed truthfully as three tiers of the ground floor, because the upper floor is all at the same level, right? So, and there's an 8-foot difference between the corner at Pratt and Caroline, all the way up to the entry to just about where the fields are, the easement area is. So there's a significant drop off in there. And I think you will be challenged to try to take this sort of a pavilion type approach in terms of the fenestration and apply that, because it's going to be very difficult to negotiate all those grades. So maybe what you need to consider is the pavilion approach, but in 3 elements, right? And then change the fenestration or modify the fenestration to be more of a horizontal read, right? What that will allow you to do is better negotiate the change in grade, but it's also going to allow you to kind of articulate the building, I think, in a much more eloquent way. For instance, the middle image to the top, you can see how the base of that building really anchors and sort of negotiates the change in grade. There's a change in grade that's occurring there, right? To the extent where the piece at the top is light and it allows you to stitch together the two corners in a very elegant way, right? I'm asking you to do something not exactly like that, but consider that as you kind of begin to work through the architecture of this wing of the building. If you go to the next slide, actually the next one. Yeah, this one. You can kind of see how this sort of a relentless approach to the verticality of the orientation of those windows, it creates this sort of a relentless approach coming around the backside of the building. I don't think it reads very well here. Good. So that's why I'm asking you to take a look at that. You don't have to do it, but just take a look at it again and see how you can better express the fenestration and the massing, and carry it around this wing of buildings. I think those are my general comments. I know you're early in the process. You heard a heck of a lot today. We certainly don't mean to roast you in any way, so I hope you're not too crisp at the moment, but, we still love you, and I'll turn it back over to Pavlina.
Thank you, Osborne, and thank you specifically for the last comments. It can feel very intense and too much because we're trying to pack a lot into a very small amount of time. You've spent weeks on this, and there's a lot of work evident, a lot of thought evident, and we're trying to pack a lot of comments and a lot of kind of considerations into 1 hour, so it does sound like a lot. I also want to thank the next project who is patiently waiting. We're nearly done. Sometimes when it's a first presentation, it does take longer to get through things, but it does speed up much quicker at the second and third one. Everything's much quicker. So I only have a few closing comments in addition to really commending you on the work that's done so far and really emphasizing that there's still much to resolve. I want to go back to one of the comments that we talked about the front. Not that there hasn't been enough said about it, but I want to make sure that, because I didn't mention, similar to the parking, specifically certain things to consider. So the location of the entry, whether it's in the middle or to the left or to the right or closer to one corner or the other, is rather irrelevant when it comes to the actual location on the site. What's important to consider here that the corners are important because they actually signify and announce your project. So I see that in this volume here, there's like the signage above and there's the heroic element on the corner of the building. But there's nothing actually happening on the ground level that you have that says you have arrived at the city school. It simply says, cross the building, we're over here, and go find your entry somewhere else. It's extremely important that the entry sequence that you've been hearing about starts as soon as you cross the street and you arrive at the corner of the school. Again, it doesn't matter where the actual door happens, which what we're calling the entry. I think it's important to start to think of this as like the entry is actually the entire area that you're having around for multiple reasons, for the drop-off reasons, for the legibility reasons, for sort of the young person who's like 6 or 7 or years old that's arriving and says, okay, where is my school? Is it the signage that's on the corner? Is it the door that's over there beyond the ramp and into the recess? All of it is the school. All of it is the arrival of the school. It all needs to be handled with that sort of intention and with that sort of welcome, you've arrived here. It's also important that the corners, again, are treated slightly differently. When you actually start and look at it realistically, there's like traffic lines, there's traffic poles there's like a fire hydrant, there's like all of this different stuff, right? And the building simply brought up like right to the edge of the sidewalk doesn't necessarily make for the most, generous or functional circulation if you're arriving at a civic building, if you actually want to be welcoming to people. It's another reason to really allow for some of these edges to decompress a little bit. The way I've seen it handled on some of the other city schools that have been kind of more located into tighter properties and tighter to is that they give a little bit of a relief around the corners for two reasons. One, that it facilitates sort of the circulation that happens around the corner of people crossing, arriving from each side, others kind of moving through. It decompresses things. It allows for everyone to feel like you've arrived and sort of make their way through that, the rest of the procession to the actual front door. So I really urge you, as you continue to study, not only how the sequence is like once you get off the bus right in front of the door or the car, actually how it works for the entirety of that block. And in return, what it would do, it would help kind of these prominent corners that you've set up into the building really feel like they have significance and they're important because they are the gateways to your arrival into the school, and it's sort of the beginning of you entering the entire procession. It's again, working with the landscape and with the architect hand in hand to create and craft these meaningful three-dimensional environments. So it's not really just about the mass of the building alone. It's about that ground level experience, which is how everyone actually is going to experience the building. Last comment about that drop off is that you would likely want to lengthen that because it will facilitate for more cars more efficiently to pull up away from traffic and do drop off as opposed to, because by the time you park one bus there's probably room for only one or two more cars to pull up behind it. So there's some pretty heavy thought that needs to happen into the mechanics of this drop-off experience. I did see in your enlargement that the bus and the car drop-off open up to an active bike lane. I don't know how that works with maintaining an active bike lane and actively unloading people and families along that edge. It's very complicated. I think it needs really a pretty careful study, and I urge you to actually do that hand in hand with planning because they're perhaps more familiar with how some of these things need to be rearranged and reordered in order to make it happen. It's tough, and we don't envy your task. So in closing, I want to say that you've thought about all of the big moves. The pieces are on the table and on the map. There's a few kind of sort of bigger moves, not fundamental. There's nothing about like, oh, start from scratch, rethink, revision, this whole thing. But there are some fundamental moves that still need to happen and can happen that can really make a really meaningful difference to how the whole project functions. We really look forward to seeing this evolve further, to see your continued thought and care into the project. We have no doubt that in the next iteration, it will be that much further along and that much more considered, judging by kind of what the work's been done up to this level. And we look forward to seeing it. And we look forward to this community getting the project that they've waited for so long. I think it's important to have a little bit more conversation, perhaps with planning regarding specifically around Bethel and Pratt and all of that. These are conversations we had with the Perkins design team folks when we were trying to solve some of those specific items, including in some other city projects, kind of the conversation with the parks people across the street. All those can happen now, and in the end, it will add to much greater whole. Thank you for your time. Thank you for bearing with us. We look forward to seeing the project, get to the next level. And with that, I'm going to hand it to planning to switch us over to the other projects. And thank you to those folks for your patience as well. Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone. Chester and team, it's really exciting. I think what we often see from the panel is when they speak at length, it's because they're most excited about it, right? So again, it's you have shown, or the team has shown, a really great in the past with other schools that you've done. You've responded so well to the comments that I'm excited to see what you kind of come up with following this. So please send me the final presentation so I can post that to the website. We'll be in touch with the minutes shortly, and we can work together to maybe have a meeting with between planning staff and yourselves prior to returning to UDAAP to kind of work through these problems together. I'm going to now make panelists for the correct people for the next item of panel. If you want to, take a quick break while we get that up, it's a long morning. Okay, so let's see here. We're moving on to the second item today, which is going to be Patapsco Point. I will be elevating the folks from that team. Let's see here. Sorry, just making sure I'm getting everybody. I've made Ezar, I've made you the presenter. If that needs to change for any reason, please let me know, but feel free to pull up your presentation. And if there's anybody else that needs to be elevated from the attendees list to a panelist, please let me know.
Hi, Caitlin. Good morning. I think the only person that's going to be speaking besides me is going to be Catherine.
Okay,
I think Vinette may chime in, so why don't you make her able to speak as well?
awesome. Yep, I've elevated both of them so they can speak at will. And then you can pull up your presentation.
Okay. Is that is my screen visible?
We can see it, yes.
Okay, perfect.
And let's wait for our panelist to come back online in case they went to refill their water. It was
Sure.
a lengthy item beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is to be frank, I don't recall. It's either the third or fourth time that Patapsco Point has been here. It's gone through some major changes. And so the last one was shifting it to a phased project and really kind of drastically changing the massing. So this is kind of a response to the panel's comments regarding those changes. And a lot of it is focused on the public space, both along Roundview Road and the kind of where the road that intersects the site ends, creating that space. So I'll hand it over to Pavlina, and thank you all for your patience today.
Thank you all. Welcome back to UDAAP. Apologies for the delay in the previous presentation. Sometimes it bleeds over a lot. I promise we will end at or before the same time. We will catch up mid-flight. Appreciate you being here today. We saw the project recently, so it's, I'm imagining, pretty fresh in everyone's mind, which is a good thing. We won't have to recover too much. So with respect to today's meeting, please focus on the items that have really changed, because as I understand it, the new scheme is intact. There's just really, from the comments even, it was things about articulating the site and the building, less so the big moves that we have had to deal with before. Without any further ado, I'll hand it over to your team. Just a quick note, with me today are Kevin Storm and Osborne Anthony. Sharon Bradley couldn't be here today, but she does have comments for the team, and we'll include them in the meeting minutes as well. So please take it away.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ezra Amin. I'm with Grimmon Parker Architects. We're back again, presenting Patapsco Point to the UDAAP panel. As Pavlina mentioned, there was a lot of comments from the last meeting in terms of the comments on the site plan. And so I'm going to skip over the slides that we had in the previous presentation in terms of the origin of the project, the history behind the project. And I'm going to jump straight to the slide that has our previous presentation and the scheme that we had presented to the panel in the last meeting. If you'll recall, basically this project is now a phased project with a phase 1 and a phase 2. We're focusing on the phase 1 portion of the building first, but obviously looking at the site holistically in order to accommodate a future phase 2, and want to look at how the site will look once that phase 2 is online as well. Essentially, the big move with the project was that apart from splitting the building into 2 separate buildings, we were orienting the entrance into the site via this new entrance road aligned with Bunchy Road, along with two separate entrances into the parking lot from the two opposing sides. The parking again is at the rear of the building. And then there are outdoor amenities at the terminus of this entrance into the project site. And then entrances into the building are at the corners of phase 1 and phase 2 buildings. And the adult high school component is at the lowest level of the phase 1 building. And that entrance is at this corner as well. Just some images from the previous site and massing model. We had, again, the outdoor amenities kind of at the terminus of that entrance into the project site aligned with Bunchy Road. We were hinting at tower corner elements that were kind of speaking to one another across from this entrance drive into the site, that also announce the entrance into the residential portions of the building, and then also looking at articulating the corner of the phase 1 building to indicate that there is an adult high school entrance at this location. So there are a lot of comments that are on this slide, but I'm just going to sort of distill what the general main points were from the panel in the previous meeting. There was a comment about reducing the width of this entrance drive to make that a little more pedestrian friendly, and also kind of extending the entrance drive sort of pedestrian feeling of that a little bit more as you get towards the rear of the site at the outdoor amenity spaces, in addition to removing the 6 spaces on either side of the outdoor amenity spaces as well. There was a comment made about the formality of the outdoor spaces, particularly this trellis space, and making that a little more functional and a little more contemporary in terms of the use of the space, allowing residents to be able to use that and make it less formal. There was a comment made about the pavilion and perhaps realigning that or relocating that, as well as the retaining wall at the back here and softening the height of that retaining wall. There were also comments made about this second sort of tertiary sidewalk that is related specifically to the buildings in the project, as opposed to the more public sidewalk, and removing this and allowing the front entrance patios to be a little more integrated with the landscaping once that tertiary sidewalk is removed. There were comments about drop-off zones at the front entrances of the residential entrances of both buildings, as well as the drop-off sequence for the adult high school. And I believe those were the major comments from the previous meeting. There was also comments about integrating or locating, giving thought to bike racks, bike storage at the outside of the building. And then generally speaking about stormwater management and looking at integrating that throughout the project site as much as is feasible. One additional comment that I want to note is that there was mention of the proximity of the parking to the building and allowing a little more space in between the face of the building and the parking, perhaps introducing landscaping between these two elements as well. And then this pinch point here, giving more room to the secondary entrance into the building at this corner. So the updated site plan has tried to incorporate as much of those comments as possible. What we've done essentially is reduce the width of this entrance drive into the project site, and then also allowed this to kind of define this outdoor amenity space a bit more on either side. We softened the the edge of this a little bit by allowing a curve, introducing a curve at the outdoor amenity space. And this allows for a kind of a indication that there's something special going on here, as well as slowing down of traffic at this juncture. We've also eliminated those 6 spaces on either side of the outdoor amenity spaces, and we've focused more on making these more usable, more contemporary, less formal. What we've done is essentially created an ellipse, which serves as a common area for residents to hang out informally, as well as potentially having formal gatherings in the space like a movie night. We've introduced amphitheater seating at this back edge here to allow residents to perhaps go out on a nice day and read a book or just hang out. On either side of this is the playground, which we've kept from the previous scheme, and an outdoor kitchen, which replaces the dog park that we had in this location previously. There are trellis elements that announce the entrance into both of these outdoor features, and then all of this sort of helps soften the edge and the height of this retaining wall as you're looking at it down this axis. At the front of the building, we've eliminated the secondary, tertiary sidewalk and essentially taken this main sidewalk from the street and curved it ever so slightly so that it moves closer to the building and kind of serves double purpose. One is the obviously the main sidewalk along Roundview, but also it helps to move this crosswalk between the buildings a little bit closer to the corners and entrances into the buildings, so folks don't have to go out to the main sidewalk and then cross over and then go into the other building if they need to. So this does a couple things: eliminates that secondary sidewalk, and also kind of provides a little bit of accent to this this corner and entrance into the site as well. We've also introduced drop-off areas immediately outside both entrances into the building, with benches and waiting areas for folks that are waiting for an Uber or just waiting for a friend to pick them up. Also, bike racks at either end of these entrances into the building. This also this theme is also continued sort of at the adult high school entrance as well, with a drop-off zone in this location for folks that will be just dropping off and going into the adult high school. Bike racks in this location as well. And again, the same kind of approach has been taken where at the residential entrances and the adult high school entrances, we tried to eliminate the sort of the elevational difference between the patio and the grade outside the building, the sidewalk, and the connection to that, to allow folks from the drop-off area or the sidewalk to sort of move directly into the entrances into the building. We've tried to eliminate or alleviate the pinch point at this location for the secondary entrance for residents into the building from this parking lot, and landscape this area a little bit nicer. One comment also that I forgot to mention was the trash enclosures that were sort of on axis of the entrances into the parking lot. We've tucked those away a little bit more discreetly on either side of the parking lot of the two buildings. And then also we have added another 5 feet or so of landscaped area between the building face and the parking lot, and just provide a little more landscaping and softness around the secondary entrances into the residential portions of the building from the rear. Again, the floor plans, as Pavlina pointed out, really have not changed much. We focus primarily on the outside of the building, the site plan, and the massing. So this is just the terrace level plan showing the adult high school at the front and the residential entrance, the secondary residential entrance from the back for this rear parking lot. The first floor plan, again, just kind of indicating that the amenity spaces are at the corners of these two buildings. and then a typical floor plan indicating just the second, third, and fourth floors are primarily units. What I'm going to do is kind of jump to a few images that we have. They're not included in the slide, but these will give you an idea of what the building is doing massing-wise, as well as articulation of the elevations of the building that we've tried to look at. Again, this is the front of the building showing the entrance into the project site. A view from Bunchi Road looking into the project site, and you get an idea of what these tower elements are kind of shaping up to be. I'll talk a little bit more about the materiality of the elevations in a future slide. Close up, kind of indicating the landscaping at the front of the building. The street view of the entrance into the phase 1 portion of the building, showing the drop-off zone and then the waiting area, bike racks. The end of the phase 2 building, looking from Carver. The drop-off zone for phase 2. This gives you an idea of what's happening at the outdoor amenity spaces at the rear of the project site. Again, this outdoor common area that we're saying is synthetic turf, just to kind of allow a little bit more durability and allowing folks to play or to have outdoor functions and not kind of tear up that that lawn, and then entrances, kind of trellis entrances into the outdoor kitchen area, as well as the playground, the amphitheater seating that I talked about earlier, that kind of helps soften the height of the street retaining wall as it goes back. And then also kind of gives an indication of the kind of relocated crosswalks and the definition of the paving pattern that kind of defines this more pedestrian-friendly zone. Again, another view just of this, looking more towards this outdoor kitchen area. It's a street view. This is the corner of the adult high school. I'm sorry, the secondary residential entrance of the building. Adult high school is at this location here. The materiality that we're looking at for the building is brick, along with fiber cement panel and fiber cement lap siding, vinyl windows, and in some locations, Juliet balconies, accent panels in some locations, just to kind of break up the rhythm. And then we're looking at doing something a little less formal in terms of, a little more playful in terms of the location of the windows that they go from floor to floor, kind of staggering those a little bit. And then one element that I'll kind of touch on a little bit in a later slide is the projections and striping, the banding of the brick. We're taking that element from the school at the adjacent property as it's doing that. And we thought it would be a nice move to kind of introduce that into our project, and kind of helps tie it back and relate it to the school as well. A view of the drop-off area in this corner, kind of entrance into the adult high school. A rear view of the site and the elevations at the back for the buildings. One comment that was made in the previous meeting was in terms of the number of bays and perhaps looking at unifying those a little bit more. And what we tried to do is really where we had kind of previously indicated individual bays, both at the front and the rear of the buildings. We tried to kind of combine those into one large bay that's kind of broken up a little bit per segment, so that it doesn't seem too repetitive, and kind of made one big move as the building segments and turns the corner. Another view at the rear of the building. And then just sort of a last view of what's happening here at the terminus of the entrance drive into the project site. I mentioned earlier that we're looking at the school at the adjacent property as sort of a precedent. And one of the things that we wanted to, this image isn't unfortunately a very great quality, but you can get a sense of what the school, the actual existing, the historic portion of the school has brick banding at the corner elements, kind of just doing something a little bit special at the corners of the school, which we think is a really nice feature, and we're trying to incorporate that at certain locations at the corners of the residential entrances and the adult high school in our project. And there's also a modern kind of addition of this to the school that introduces multicolored panels, which we've also tried to pick up on and introduce into our project as well. Some precedent images we had mentioned at the previous meeting, and kind of in keeping with what the Cherry Hill neighborhood has seen in recent projects and how those are elevated and massed. And then just a materials board in terms of what the building is kind of shaping up as right now. I mentioned the brick that we're looking at in terms of trying to potentially match with the school, as well as the banding element, projecting brick at just the entrances of the and the corners of the two buildings, as well as the adult high school. Sort of a lighter colored a two-tone multi-tone panel that kind of borrows from the bays of the school next door, as well as the lap siding that I mentioned before, fiber cement lap siding, fiber cement panel, vinyl windows, and Juliet balcony. And then accent paneling in some locations along the bay. And then I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who's going to talk a little bit about the landscape features on the site.
My apologies. It looked like Catherine rejoined. Let me elevate her. Okay.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I apologize for the shift over. I'm in the car driving right now, so I'm familiar enough with the plan. I can describe it pretty well, I think. Similar to the first or the last iteration, we're keeping that same alley along the robust sidewalk along Roundview Road. We're focusing a lot with the planting on the comfort of the pedestrians. So there's extra space between vehicular passageways and pedestrian passageways, and those are built up with a pretty significant planting scheme. The big changes from the last iteration, as Azar mentioned, were the extra space between the parking lots and the building, which we've just shown some sort of generic planting in there, but there will be multi-level shrubs and trees in that area. Around the amenity spaces, we focused on shade trees to help to shade those areas where people will be sitting for periods of time, while allowing that open space of the ellipse to be as usable as possible. we tried to fit in some meadow plantings there because there's enough open space that we could have some really interesting texture, color, some habitat areas there for butterflies and bees and things as well. So wherever I can find a pocket to put those in, we're going to put those in. Along the front, we have the same issues. It is going to probably be very hot along Roundview Road at that entrance. So trying to get those shade trees to serve the pedestrians, the visitors, the residents as much as possible. Farther down, we have hillside conditions where we're going to have some very naturalistic shade, evergreen, and flowering trees planted. Nothing very formal there. And then, of course, the stormwater management facilities where we have a surface facility are going to be a wide variety of plantings appropriate to that condition with grasses and perennials of different colors and heights so that that facility really does become a feature. I'll say here that we haven't quite done a full scale stormwater management evaluation here. So it's my preference that this facility will, it is shown right now as very rectilinear. I'd like to do our best to protect the existing large scale trees in that area. So that shape could change pretty significantly in that corner. Where we have retaining walls, just like in previous iterations, I love a nice cascading plantings along those walls to soften those edges so it's a little more pleasing to the eye. I always try to stay native the best I can, and also where people will be congregating in the amenity spaces, especially adding an element of nice scented varieties, native cascading plants like creeping jenny or creeping phlox, something like that, that will not only flower and be lovely, but also smell nice for those people spending hours there at a time. I think we've planted as much as we possibly can. I'm definitely going to have a robust planting for any site I touch. So I welcome your comments, but I think we've addressed all that you've mentioned to us previously. On the next panel is, I think you've seen it before, the plant palette. You'll see a focus on natives, different elements, not just shade trees everywhere. We have shade, flowering, and evergreen trees, both deciduous and evergreen shrubs. And what's not shown here are those creeping ground covers that are anticipated for the terrace retaining walls. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Catherine.
Okay.
And I think we're happy to hear any questions or comments from the panel.
Great. Thank you all so much for this very efficient and thoughtful and clear presentation, as usual. We appreciate you, and we appreciate all of the work you've done to date and responding to the panel's comments. And really, ultimately, what matters is improving the project and getting to this stage. Because everything's pretty clear and because we've seen things more recently, I'll combine the Q&A and the comments. This way our panelists can ask any clarifying questions that they have, but also offer their comments in the same breath. I think we can cover both that way and have more time individually for things. With that, I'll start with Osborne this time. And Osborne, do you have any questions for the team? And if not, what are your thoughts on their recent work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a significant amount of improvement. I think I have one question, though. Could you go to a view that shows me what's happening to the area, let's say the larger building fronting onto the street? I think the grades are going down as you approach the adult learning center.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening to the base of the building there?
Sure.
If you have a view that can show us that.
Right. So you're right. The site is sloping down to a low point here, and then what we're doing is basically. Are you talking about the massing asking about the massing of the building or just the site topography?
No, not the corner. If you can go around to the left. Do you have a view that shows us what's there?
At the rear of the building?
No, to the left of the screen.
Oh, let me see if I have an aerial that kind of shows that.
I guess what I'm getting at is there's a significant amount of wall that's there. And it's kind of hard to see it from, an aerial view, but I can interpolate what that is like. And I'm just curious if you're going to leave it that way, if there's some consideration to deal with that, even if it's some landscaping strategy. There's not a lot of room for landscaping, but it's literally occurring kind of in the worst area of the project.
Yeah, you're mentioning this.
No.
Wall.
I'm along the street.
Okay.
See those 3 bays of windows right in the middle?
Right here.
Go left. The 3 block. 1, 2, 3. Right beneath that.
Mm-hmm.
At the ground floor, coming down and touching grade, there's a significant amount of wall and height in there.
Right. So
it's actually a full story.
It is a full story, and this is actually part of the adult high school, which we have not indicated windows for yet. So this is a part of development that we have not gotten to just yet. But the adult high school will occupy this whole area in here, and there will be windows along here, and we will kind of develop this a little bit more, as well as what's happening immediately outside with the grade at this portion of the building.
Right. So the intent is to provide windows.
That's correct. That's right.
Okay. All right. Because I thought I saw in your initial goals, the corners were certainly going to be glazed, but this is a little bit of an anomaly because of the program use immediately adjacent to this space. So somehow you have to figure out how to integrate additional glazing along this length here. Okay. All right. So I'll just jump into my comments. I think this is, you've taken much of the comments from the panel and you've gone through methodically and addressed them, I think, in a reasonably thoughtful way. I think the landscaping, certainly along, I can't remember the name of that street. Is it Fountain Road? Roundview, I'm sorry, is beginning to come together. I recognize, the importance of trees that would pretty much line that sort of a roadway edge and define the sidewalk. But I also believe that pulling the sidewalks back at the corner of Bunchy Road to provide a little bit of relief and kind of mitigate a functional condition there, I think is, in my opinion, I think it's beginning to work very well. It gives you a little bit more relief off of the crosswalks as you get through the crosswalks. And again, as you pointed out, it gets you a little bit closer to the buildings. Removing that sort of tertiary sidewalk, I think, was very important because it begins to simplify, but also clarify the circulation as you coming along the sidewalk, whether you're dropped off or you're coming from a bus or whatever, and you're attempting to access these main community areas or the entries to the building. I think the raised sort of terraces that begin to wrap those entries and main community spaces begin to work much better. It's really identifying clear paths in and out of the building and around the complex as a whole. One thing that I'm still a little bit challenged with is, that sort of outdoor area next to the retaining, the focal point of the entry, at the extension of Bunchy. in many ways, I can see you still love your classics in that, you downgraded it from a classical approach to a Baroque approach, and it's still formal in many ways. It's just slightly differently. So, but for whatever reason, I guess that helps the project in many ways. So I'm not going to object to what you're doing. I would have liked to see the retained structure a little bit more organic as opposed to that still very formalized feel to it, even if the second tier were to take on a slightly different alignment when compared with the first tier. Because you got to remember, you're transitioning back to a very natural landscape, right? And the more you formalize what's happening at the lowest grade, the more difficult it becomes, to appreciate it as someone who's actually using this space. It'll begin to seem a little bit too manicured. So just be mindful of that. I think overall, somehow, I'm not sure if the amount of pavement has actually decreased. But when I look at the project as a whole, it seems to me as though there's been a reduction in terms of the amount of pavement. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's just an illusion, but that's the feel that I'm getting. I do like the idea that if you've taken the comments and you've introduced that layer of landscaping and planting, that buffer between the windows on the ground floor and the head-end parking at the back, particularly of the main building. I think that's going to help considerably. I still question, the very rectilinear and formalized kind of a shape for the bioretention area. I would have liked to see that to be a little bit more organic in shape, to kind of work better with the natural landscaping that's actually here. But maybe you have your reasons. Perhaps they're technical. I don't know. But nonetheless, I can accept that as well. Again, we talked about the Adult Learning Center and introducing windows along a round view, which is very important and essential. I'm not sure if there are many windows on the short end of the facade that faces the parking lot. I would expect to see something there. If you can go to your 3D views now.
You're talking about this elevation here?
Yeah, I mean, the trees kind of block it. I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, right now
the rest of it isn't blank.
Yeah, to be honest with you, we're still kind of determining the extent to which we're going to be developing the inside of this, but your point is a good one. I think we'll try to provide as much glazing at this end of the building as possible for the adult high school.
I mean, and even if programmatically it's difficult to do, maybe it's just a matter of introducing a very narrow band of clerestory windows that kind of, strengthens the form and the base of the building. Particularly in this location, maybe even in the location that fronts onto Round View. So you're not necessarily so you're introducing some aspect of daylight, but at the same time, it works with the form and the massing of the building as a whole. I think overall, the treatment at the upper levels, you're taking an approach that introduce an aspect of joyfulness. The building begins to read more as being somewhat jovial. The elements for the lighter panels, that anchors the corners and creates these sort of pavilions in between. What's interesting is you're not just placing them individually, but you're beginning to connect them, and you see that here at the parapet. And I think that begins to unify elements of the building. It provides, a more joyful read. The only thing I will say as I look at the building, in two things actually. One, just be careful because you're borderline stylized, right? You don't want the building to appear to be too stylized. Again, the variation in color, the patterning associated with these lighter panels, I think it's beginning to come together nicely. And maybe the brick or unless that's lap side, and I'm not sure, the darker elements between the light panels I would argue that it could potentially be a slightly lighter shade, but nonetheless, it's just a choice you need to make. And then my final comment is, as I look at the front of the building and I come around to the side, on the back side in the parking lot, it's all the same. It really looks very much, there's no difference. And I'm wondering if there's something, some subtle move you could have made at the back, so it responds to that sort of a hillside, that sort of a view towards the school on the hill that would differentiate it to some degree from what's actually happening on the main frontage on round view. Because I believe it's a different facade, a different condition. It's all the same use, yes, but the views are somewhat different. And I suspect the building needs to reflect that to some degree. So think about that. And if there's anything you can integrate or slightly tweak to respond to this different context at the back, I think it would be greatly appreciated. And then my truly last comment is, I understand you can't, you're restricted in terms of the 20 or 24 feet at the main entry. Maybe the way to think about dealing with that is in the next iteration, you have to consider lighting, and perhaps how you organize the lighting or the types of lighting you select in terms of site lighting will begin to create another layer of elements that can manage the scale of that entry, that very wide entry between the two buildings. Those are my comments. Thank you so much. Good work.
Thank you, Osborne. Kevin, what are your questions and comments for the team?
No, I don't think I have any real questions. Again, like we saw this so recently, and you've been making really great incremental progress as we've gone through this. I really feel like you've taken into account, all of our, most or all of our comments, and I do think this is a big improvement. I mean, I think, to me, I was always so troubled by that lack of buffer between parking and the parking facing side of the building, and that seems to be. I know you can only mitigate that so much, but it looks like you've made a big improvement there. I do think that the new configuration of your amenity spaces, while, as Osborne said, is still pretty formal, but I do think that by enlarging that oval and making it a slightly more flexible space, it's not just about sort of sitting around a piece of art and having it be feeling static. I think it can probably accommodate a variety of sort of informal different kinds of community needs. I do think that it might be worth considering where I think you have these kind of spherical bollards or something between the oval and the road. I think it could still work to have trees or landscape between those spaces, so that when you're in the oval, you don't kind of quite feel like you're like right on top of vehicular movement, and I don't think that would detract from the approach. I think you would still sort of see through the veil of trees that there's something interesting happening beyond there. So I would just consider that sort of kind of landscape enclosure to as a kind of a foil to the more hardscape step terrace enclosure on the other side. I think that seems to be working well. I mean, it's kind of a shame you lost the dog park, but it does seem like you still have room. Like you could, to the right of the playground, you could sort of still utilize that lower, flatter space if you felt like that was something that would benefit a lot of the residents. It is a good amenity, but in general, I feel like the site is coming together, and I can imagine like that whole sort of T-shaped tabled entry, and it does look like you're showing it tabled, which I think is great. I think that I can imagine that being closed off, for a special event or every now and then. Would be a great spot to have, outdoor, like a block party for the residents or that kind of thing. It'd be really nice. You can still access the parking from the other two curb cut entries off of Roundview and Carver. So I think that's coming along nicely. I was very happy to hear your response to the question about the windows on the base. And I think even if you're still in progress, I think it does your scheme a lot more favors if you just throw in some placeholders there on those sort of expanses of brick. but it sounds like that's coming. And then I guess I think the one thing that you didn't quite it's kind of a minor thing. It's not a massive thing at all, but I still think you haven't maybe landed the trash containers in the right spot. And I think it's much better than having them on axis from when you kind of enter the two parking areas. But I think, since the trash has to be rolled out anyways, I don't think there's any harm in having it rolled across and sort of just that 20 feet further away from unit windows or classroom windows, for both smell, for just visual proximity, cutting off views, and also even from the views from the upper units above, just having it so close and kind of looking down into the garbage. It just seems like if you could maybe scoot those back to the side where they were, but just not on axis, as was pointed out in our last set of comments. But again, I think that's a very easy thing to kind of try a few locations. Getting to the architecture themselves, like in some ways I hesitate to kind of go too much into this, because I know that you're going to get a different sort of subjective response from probably all the panelists and anyone on the call. But if you maybe just go to your like one of the elevations, where any of them will probably do. There is something that's very, like, this is clearly, like, as your precedent page shows, you're clearly sort of within the kind of the language of 2010s architecture, that it's about this kind of like graphic incision of like a pattern and then sort of coloring in the boxes in this, and it's a kind of a graphic design exercise on sort of layered onto a facade. And I know that there's limitations when you have stick build and budget and all of that stuff. I do, I think it's great that you've kind of grounded the project in a sort of more tactile, solid, and sort of durable base that gives it a little bit of a little bit more sense of kind of longevity and durability. But there's something I think if you were to kind of think about where to spend money on the more sort of expensive materials, maybe the two heads of these two entrance, I don't know what I'll call them, like the heads of the building, like the two facing sort of tower elements, like framing your entrance. It could be interesting to study that sort of wrapping, or like that, all the floors sort of wrapping from front to back, being more in the language of a solid base and less of the fiber cement light panels, and something just sort of that marks that sort of center in a way, or that marks that sort of like that center of gravity for the site. Might be an interesting thing to do. And if you go to your precedent pages, again, it's very subjective, but like the one on the upper right, like that one, let's wait till we get there. The one on the upper right has a kind of instead of having like sort of 4 or 5 materials, has kind of 2 or 3, and there's a somehow, and just again, this is kind of my opinion, so take it or leave it, but it has a little bit more of a kind of a solidity and a little bit more of a restraint. But still, I think with those the elements, you're still able to kind of articulate special points of entry or special moments. So it might be, I know that you're trying to balance, like I know that like Osborne praised for the kind of like the joyful kind of patterning, which I agree that there is something nice about that. But I think it's like this kind of graphic sort of plaid pattern, and with the fact that if you're using vinyl windows that don't have much of a setback, there's just the risk of it sort of appearing a little bit not super substantial. So I think so one and if you are committed to the kind of like the graphic patterning as you have it, maybe look at how deep you can get away with the window setbacks as an example of another way to kind of help lend a little bit of sort of heft and solidity to the facade. I think like that window depth is a very important thing, and I think in your renderings you're kind of showing it very taut and thin. So those are just some suggestions. I know you're still in process on probably on this part too, and that there's probably a lot more to come. So, but I think in general you really answered to a lot, and just really that's a huge improvement. So thank you for all the great work.
Thank you, Kevin. My comments are very much in line with everything you've heard so far, down to the detailed ones, like the bollards versus the trees. I too think that the trees will do what the bollards are doing and more. My perspective is that the space feels a little bit exposed, in the sense of, perhaps there's this sunny winter day when everything being flooded with light would be useful, but pretty much the rest of the year, you would need a little bit of shade, a little bit of respite there. So I think that's what the trees would offer. I think they would protect the common area from vehicles, but it would also start to shade at least that edge of the lawn where you're showing chairs, which would be really lovely. And I don't think it will block off any of the views, because as soon as the trees mature, that first sort of like 10 foot is a clear vista into the lawn. And, you know, there's sort of like the whole, if anything, they can help frame some of that view. I don't think it would really hurt the kind of classical approach to it, you know, kind of the central axial view that you've set up. I think it would enhance it. The veil that Kevin mentioned, even in the winter months, sort of having the veil of the trees that, again, shape the space would be really helpful, because you're transitioning from a 5-story building to an at-grade condition. You do need these heights in between that help people transition the scales and still feel contained, so that they're not just on the edge of a road, but they are kind of in this outdoor space. It would make a big difference if that edge is strengthened indeed. So thank you for all of the work. I think there's a lot of great moves happening around that we maybe even didn't mention in the presentation. In one of those 3D views, I was noticing these slightly elevated terraces from the entry volumes that have this really great relationship with the common space across the driveway. Yeah, like really taking us through those 3D. I don't know if you have them handy. The render. So we get in the back where there's the back portion of the terrace, and that one overlooks directly either the outdoor kitchen or the playground. There. So it's not really just the treatment along this edge and the elevated tabletop drive, but it's immediately what's happening at the edges of the building that is extremely strong. I mean, for me, when all of this starts to read as a continuous considered idea, you've succeeded. I think some of the issues with the previous project was that there'll be a big move in the architecture, but absolutely nothing to support that on the ground plane. And you can see this example here when they're really both strengthening each other, and they create a much more cohesive, much more legible, much more kind of honorable experience. So kudos to your entire team for doing that. I think you've all coordinated pretty closely. Like after the building got massed and sited, the work of the landscape and the architecture team hand in hand is pretty obvious. I think we can see how both these elevated entry points, but then all the other entries into the street, from the street, and all the way into the landscape are starting to really connect and stitch together, and it creates a really wonderful space. So kudos to all of you. I absolutely love the outdoor kitchen and where it's positioned, and I think it's going to be so well used. I mean, this will be the coolest place to be, because there's room for everybody, and there's space for everybody to do whatever it is that they want to do, and create all these different experiences. So some night is a cookout night, another night is just hanging out on the lawn and watching the kids play over there. I think it's pretty great. I was also really impressed with how you've handled the urban edge. Last time there was a discussion about allow the things that really want to read like entries connect directly to the street and welcome people from there. So extend your arrival at the very edge of the street, and you've done that really well. Whether you'll be able to hold on to the special paving that extends there now, I don't know. And in many ways, once you make these significant moves into the landscape, in my mind, even when if it goes back to just scored, concrete, it would still work. It would still be legible. And in fact, you can even just play with the scoring of the concrete, to designate these different mats that you've created. But there's this really wonderful announcement welcoming the amenities there. You can pull up the car, you can park the bike, you can get on the sidewalk, you can walk to the door. It's vegetated kind of on the corners. It's well connected to everything else. Again, the architecture that is expressed in the facade works with what's expressed completely in the ground plane, and it's just a really, really wonderful work that you've done here. Similar for the the high school, I think it really does start to daylight itself a little bit more. It's always been this program that's tucked at the base of the building, and in your various iterations, you've tried to find its entry, and then the last one was from the parking lot. Like now it has a presence, it has sort of like, yes, you've arrived, welcome, this is it. And it still allows, obviously, for the, more pragmatic way of like, go park over there and there's an accessible route to the front door thing to function. And that's really important too. One thing I would say, and I think you heard in some of the comments from the other panelists, is about really, you've brought a little bit, like you said, like a special treatment to the brick base. And especially here for the high school, because it really exemplifies its facade. I feel like the housing entries are a lot more about this whole vertical element with the brick base, but here in particular, because there's a horizontality to it, the school is exemplified. It's perceived as this brick building. I think it's important to, as Osmar was mentioning, really study the openings for the remainder of it. And when you look at the building where you borrowed kind of the brick pattern, I would look at the whole thing, because when you showed it, there was a certain harmony about it. Like the brick made sense there because of how it was working with the openings and the type of windows and things like that. So if you're going to take the brick, I would say take the rest of it too, or at least to some extent, like use it as a starting point, but in its entirety, because it would give you some really nice cues as to how to marry, that particular articulation with the openings. And of course, you'll transform them, and of course, you'll make them better and make them fit your project. But I think the pattern making that's happening in the upstairs is its own thing. And I think that base, especially on the school side, has an opportunity to read as its own element, very much the way it reads in this picture, right? Because there's other things architecturally happening at that entry and then even to the right. But this classroom wing has developed this language that is recognizable. And I think it's okay to do that at the school, which will it will really reinforce its identity. Other than being at the base of the building, it would actually feel like the main character at that end. So if we can go back to the massing, I think a real opportunity language, and then to the extent to which Kevin was mentioning, then have it re-emerge kind of at the main entries, right? And sort of signify it there. I was even thinking that for the remainder of the stretch, and I don't know how much of it is left, but you certainly have it kind of at the other buildings too, at the building on the left as well. But I'm thinking specifically for the area that doesn't have the high school. I would say, so the building on the right, you point to its entry, and so that other stretch kind of to the right. I'm even wondering if the areas of brick that aren't entry or the school, do you even take that brick down to a kind of a ground, what is it called? I forget now, a ground table. Water table brick, I'm sorry, yeah, to like the 4-footer, and then you allow the dark panel to drop. And so in my mind, and kind of when I was listening to what he was saying, is like what that would do, it would make the school and the entry use of the brick that much more prominent and important. Like right now, it's just sort of runs, right? And it serves more like as a belt to the building, as opposed to if you really play it up at these volumes and then sort of tone it down in between, it still serves as a really nice grounding element to the building, but it gives it that necessary differentiation that could be very useful here. It can do a lot for you. I know Kevin was mentioning perhaps bringing it a little bit higher even, but you can do that, and again, the more difference you have between what's happening in the neutral zone versus at the prominent things, I think that's what we're after, because it can really help you. And you don't see it as much from this view because you're in bird's eye, but when you're on the ground is how you'll read it, and that's where it will make the biggest difference. So the way Osborne was noticing it, right now in the ground level view, it's a lot of flat brick, right? Whether you put openings in it or not, there's going to be a portion of the building when there's going to be a ton of flat brick because you don't have openings. And that's where I'm sort of suggesting to drop it a little bit, underplay it, allow for some of the neutral dark panel to kind of disappear in the shadow of it, and then re-emerge again with the nicer treatment on the other side. My only other comment is with respect to the massing. I think Kevin put it right. There's a level of subjectivity about it, so take it for what it is. It's nice to hear people's opinion. Ultimately, you're the designers, and you're gonna make those decisions. I think that for me also, I also welcome kind of the playfulness and the urge to like really cheer this up a little bit, because there's so many buildings that have been done into the great hardy and like the orange brick, right? And some of them are more somber and austere. Others, try to make a lot of moves. So what do we do here, right? Like, how do we handle it? I think you've already done quite a bit of really good work of responding to the previous comments in the sense that you consolidated some of the moves, and it's working really well with your massing, because the building was so long. Before there was a lot of pavilions, and it kind of gave it this relentless sort of thing. Now that you've consolidated them, there's only a few pavilions, right? There's the corner ones and there's one in the middle. So there's a whole other different level of legibility. And then you're starting to bring some of the differentiation within the volume itself. I too struggle, Kevin called it the graphic quality of this. I too struggle with it as well. It could be the number of materials, it could be the moves, but it's exactly that. There's just a lot going on, like everything and anything. I can see a building where it's just the white and the grayscale kind of panels doing this, and it looks fabulous. I can see a building where it's like all white or light gray panel and only the windows are dancing, right? It's like you can remove one of these elements and it will not compromise kind of the interest in the building. So, but I do urge you to edit back a little bit. You figure out which one you can do without. And, not just for the sake of it, but just so that it's very easy sometimes for it to not work as much as every single piece is working individually, but all of them together don't. And people easily dismiss it because it's just too much. Like, you don't understand, is this about the movement of the windows? Is it about the movement of the panels? Is it about the wood piece through the middle? We don't know. Like, all of them are individually interesting. So I think there's just one more look, take a look and see, maybe try a few variations to understand like in what way this can be done. It could also be that maybe the corner pieces allow themselves maybe the movement of the panels, and then the rest of them quiet down the panels, but they keep the windows. That's another way to also differentiate kind of the corner volumes versus the middle ones, or even to what Osborne was saying, the front and the back. I think you've created enough things within the language here that then you can actually use more strategically in different portions of the building, one or the other, to give you that differentiation. But to me, in this particular one, the windows tend to make faces. I see eyes and a smile and eyes and a smile. I don't know, that's the subjective part. People see different things. I thought, Osborne, when you said stylized, you meant that. I see smiley faces, or toothy faces. I don't know. But there's like these sort of things that are happening, but the movement of the windows is interesting, right? So it's a matter of how do we do it, and how is it mixed with some of the other elements that are happening here. But overall, there's great intent, and I have no doubt that it would arrive at something, thoughtful and considered and really great, because that's what's been the trajectory of the entire project all along. Only one, I promise, last one. So thank you for making all the edits. The additional little strip of planting will make a big difference for the residents on the ground level. In the back of the building. If you took it away from the front, it's not noticeable. 5 feet don't make a big difference in the front, make a world of difference in the back. So all of that has been amazing. And like that little shift of the trash cans one more time just across the driveway will make a big difference. So every little bit that you can continue to refine incrementally, although we probably won't see this project, I trust that it'll be thoughtful and it will be considered, and you'll continue to make it even better as you go along. My last comment would have been for the architecture of the landscape area, particularly the common space. Osborne mentioned it as Baroque. I don't think it would have crossed my mind, but now that you said it, I see it. And thank you for doing it, because I was trying to figure out why it doesn't feel fully resolved to me yet. And now I realize why. I think it's simply the formal language of it. Again, when we say formal, It has to do with the fact that, for example, the building allows itself some asymmetry. The building allows itself some irregularity. And here, by virtue of this axial relationships and then the forms that are sort of very round and kind of very symmetrical again, all it does is just creates an entirely different language from what the building is pursuing. So the building is contemporary, Kevin coined it circa 2010s, kind of as a style. The landscape, you mentioned it being more contemporary, but it really isn't. I think sort of simplifying it is a good thing, doesn't make it contemporary, right? It's the space making and it's how you circulate the space and how the spaces relate to each other is what determines that. So if there's like just one more thought to leave you with, and I don't necessarily have specific recommendations of what could change, is like the way you've worked together in the architecture and the landscape architecture to stitch all the spaces together, the experiences. I mean, this is where you see it from the edge of the curb on the left all the way to that retaining wall. All of that is working together seamlessly and so well. And, you've worked on it, you've arrived at it. Kudos for it. It's wonderful. And it's happening by virtue of its functionality. But when we look at it both kind of two-dimensionally, but definitely three-dimensionally, is when they just read as two different languages. And it might be because the only curve that we see is that wall that's holding up the elevated patios in the back of the building. That's the only thing that starts to curve. And then you sort of get on the other side of the building and, it picks up in the landscape. I would encourage the team, as you continue to coordinate and to really sync the design intents together, see if you can find ways to kind of stitch that visual language together as well. Especially now that the architecture has made movements into kind of these moving panels, whether they stay there or not, or even in these little shifts. It doesn't have to be literal. You don't have to mimic anything from the building into the landscape. But I think there's a little bit of a conversation to be had between the architects and the landscape architects about what is the unifying aesthetic of the whole project now. Now that you've moved beyond the space making, kind of the layout and the functionality of it, and you're now starting to look at it from the outside in, kind of three-dimensionally, are there opportunities to align kind of the aesthetic and stylistic quality of both? That's one thing I want to leave you with. Panelists, anything else left to mention from what we've discussed?
No, not on my end. Just it's been exciting to watch this one come together.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm hoping Caitlin is on. I'm going to hand it over to you guys. But Caitlin, I also wanted to say I think it's been a wonderful process, especially to see a project like this evolve and how free the design team was to really solve and explore. And I know it runs deeper. It's not just the design team, it's the client team, it's everybody who's committed to the project and really wants to see it succeed. And I know that this goes with the planning department because these iterations really do take everyone. So I want to thank you all for like what appears to be a really great collaborative process to get it to this point. But I also wanted to make a point to perhaps flag some of these presentations, the digital ones, perhaps. That first page that had the site plan with the notes pasted on it, I've begged other teams. Just please put something like that together. And I know we update examples ever so often, but it's not just this page, but I think the whole series of presentations we've always seen from this team have been thorough and helpful and all of that. But this is one example that I really hope other teams will use. It really helps kind of understand, and bridge kind of things between different sessions. So we can use these presentations as good examples.
Definitely. And I agree with you. I think that this is a great one when we're talking to other applicants about how to show your work over time, right? And respond to the comments. So I think the team has done an amazing job responding to the panel's comments and moving this forward. As Pavlina, mentioned, I think that this is the last time that we'll see you at UDAAP, and the rest of this can be kind of worked out with staff as you kind of get into the weeds of the project. So please email me the final presentation and I'll upload that to the website, and I'll get you minutes in the next couple days, and we can work together to kind of finish this review up as and probably focus on phase one as we move this forward.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the thoughtful comments that the panel has had over the past few presentations we've had. And it's really helped the project. We're really grateful. Thank you.
And that ends our meeting for today. So I think the next one is in November. And I look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you all.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.